Miss Donnelly, please don't call my foster mother. I'll tell you everything I know about this.
I know all about it already.
No, but I know some other stuff. Like who been thieving from the teacher's lounge, or attacking gym lockers, or even...
Jeffries, please.
Miss Donnelly,
This
please.
is Mrs. Donnelly calling from Tillman Middle.
Listen, I know. Remember the boy who cut Mr. Philmont's tires? I know who did that. I know about a murder.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hey, you're here with Toby and Alex on Caught on the Wire. We're here with you this week discussing Season 4, Episode 6, Margin of Error. As I mentioned last week, this is probably my favourite standalone episode of the show. So it's a discussion I've been looking forward to, particularly since we started this thing. What about yourself, Alex? Is this up there in the ranks for you?
Oh, absolutely. It kind of has to be just because of the number of things that happen in this episode that carry so much weight. Like, there's a lot of important events in this episode. So, just in terms of that, it stands on the shoulders of a lot of other episodes.
Oh yeah, and I like particularly Season 2 has the same thing where we have this real mid-season climax that a lot of shows tend to keep building all the way up to the end, but I like the way that there's this kind of 2 chapters to Season 4 with 2 big climaxes, one in the middle, one at the end, and this is certainly a dramatic episode, and I can't wait to get into it.
Which is interesting considering, didn't David Simon say there are no second chapters in American Lives?
Definitely, yeah. There's some subliminal messaging going on there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, speaking of messaging, should we quickly go over to Listener's Corner?
Let's take a little look.
Yeah, we won't be here for long this week. We did receive one message, though. Dan got in contact with us, Dan Weissmere, who's a very regular commenter, and we always appreciate his contributions. This week, I just wanted to say that he's just finished, obviously, with our most recent one, Alliances, and is particularly impressed with the Norman Wilson impression.
Whose was that, mine or yours?
So I think I did it.
Okay.
I think it was the...
I don't remember trying, to be honest.
I can be a devious motherfucker or something to that extent, like, one of his classics, when he mentioned the Tony Gray tip-off.
That's right,
so
yeah.
I think I might be up for a celebration there. But yeah, so appreciate that. And he also made some great contributions to the episode as well, which I definitely want to share with the audience. So, firstly, what do you both think of Naaman's absence from the scene when the boys are in the vacant looking for the body? Perhaps there's a clue there to his future compared to the others. He's not there to face the grim, macabre reality of life and death in this world. While there seems to be a dawning realization and loss of innocence in this moment with Michael, Dookie and Randy, who come to the end of the show are the ones trapped in their various doomed roles within the game. Is Naaman's absence symbolic of the fact that he still has some youthful naivety to cling to, which ultimately helps him to get out of the game?
Yeah, it's an interesting reading for sure. And yeah, Naaman is very noticeably absent from that scene. I'm off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of anything chronologically that would stop him from being there, except for, playing his video games, I guess.
I mean, there's possibly a suggestion that he was, obviously as one of the gang, he was asked along to this, but he perhaps opted out for whatever reason, and possibly the real reason was that he was too scared to go into these vacants, which would be consistent with his character of being all about the talk and not really about the actions. So I think that's possibly one way of looking at it. But yeah, it's nice that that's been mentioned, and obviously we spoke about this scene in depth last week, but we didn't mention what we couldn't see in the scene, and that of course was that Naaman was absent, and I think that is quite an important aspect. And yeah, as we said, it was all about the loss of innocence, really, this moment, the end of the fairy tale, and for Naaman, perhaps that isn't an appropriate sentiment. As Dan says, he goes through a slightly different arc to the rest of these kids.
I guess it deconstructs some of the mythology that he might be clinging on to surrounding his path in life or something like that. He doesn't want to really grasp hold of the reality of the situation when Dookie talks about there being no special dead.
Yeah.
There's a lot of titles and symbolism that he's clinging on to, and in a way this gets rid of all that and says, at the end of the day, there's nothing particularly special once you're dead. It's just dead.
Yeah, and it's not something that Naaman would want to involve himself with, so that's good. And of course, Dookie who is normally the quietest and most introverted of the boys, is the one who's most keen on this expedition. Like he's taking the lead here, which is interesting. It's not really often that we see Dookie doing that, but I think it perhaps points out an interesting spectrum amongst the kids in terms of what they actually think underneath, and compared to how they portray themselves in the classroom where people are watching. So certainly good to hear from Dan on that one.
And was there anything else, or was that was that the end of the email?
No, we also had another great contribution regarding Michael's journey with the Stanfield organisation and the epigraph from last episode. So the line, of course, being "If you with us, you with us." The line also carries a much darker connotation, rather than just the positive family sticking together message Chris is delivering, and that which we discussed. So when you with us could perhaps also be interpreted as once you join us, you're trapped. Like a pact with the devil, Michael, feeling as though he has no one else to turn to, eventually goes to them for the help they were offering. He's then with them for good. His only way out is quite literally over one of their dead bodies. This idea of being trapped also ties in with the animal trapped epigraph in the final episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that Chris's message is one that comes across as more sinister than anything else. I think we mentioned before that he's not really asking Michael to think about it. He's instructing him that that this is the way that it is now. It seems to work, or at least that's how Chris might see it. So, yeah, absolutely. Once he goes into it, there is no simply leaving, and in order for Michael to get out of that, he ends up having to kill his way out. That's his only way. So
definitely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, when he's with us, he's absolutely with us.
Yes, very true, and I do like the fact that Dan added that. It certainly needed to be added to the discussion, I think, because last week I think we very much approached that epigraph at face value. We looked at it with the meaning that Chris tried to come across with. The idea that you will become a member of our family and we'll care for you. But clearly there's the heavy subtext there, as the show has taught us, is that it really is going to be an animal trap situation. It's not going to be anything
kind of like what the
positive
zombies that the kid was talking about, getting turned. And once you're turned, there's no way of changing back again.
Yeah. So it's this hopeless idea of being trapped, and how do you get from here to the rest of the world? All these themes are playing into a lot of what's happening in the season 4 at the moment, really. And I do love how the link was made with that final epigraph, which again brings up that theme in a slightly different way.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks very much.
Okay. So there we are. Thanks very much, Dan. Please keep your comments coming, and we will always read them out each week and discuss them. So with that out of the way, have you got anything else you'd like to mention at the start, Alex, or would you like to go straight into your recap?
No, I think I'm ready to go.
All right, I'll hand over to you then.
So looking at the recap this week, we do have a couple of new interesting additions, or maybe alterations. They've kind of morphed into different things now. So what was Barksdale organisation stuff is now turned into the remnants of the Barksdale organisation. So it kind of we have one section for that in this episode. And we also end up getting a merging of all the different institutions at the very end for the election day itself. So that covers a lot of different parts. We do also have showings from Omar. We've got a small Western District section, and a small homicide section, and a small major crimes unit section. So kind of dipping in and out with the police. And then we have several big sections, which are the politics and the school. And then obviously our big election day one at the end that I mentioned already. Which is probably
Yeah,
the
certainly.
biggest.
certainly deserving of a bit of a change up in the formula for such a prolific moment in the show. So yeah, can't wait to get into it. Where are we starting?
So we're starting with the politics. So start that again. Churchgoers gather for services 2 days before the primary. All 3 mayoral candidates are in attendance at separate churches and with their families. And Randy arrives at another church with his foster mother, Miss Anna, as he is watched by Bodie and the rest of his crew. Inside Reverend Franklin's church, other revellers are enjoying the gospel music, and that includes Carcetti's Deputy Campaign Manager Norman Wilson, State Delegate Odell Watkins. We also have Grace Sampson there, and Carcetti's staffer Jerry. The Reverend offers a sermon from Exodus about the careful selection of leaders from the people. We also see Royce greeting churchgoers at the separate service he attended. On his way out, Tommy talks to the preacher with his wife Jen. He tells the preacher that Moses is a high standard to hold him to, and Reverend Franklin wishes him luck after noticing that Watkins is handing out flyers for him.
Yeah, so yet another episode that kicks off on a Sunday morning and makes a big thing about it. Mm-hmm. Following in the footsteps of the truce, the Sunday morning truce notably, and what an amazing scene it is.
This is a fantastic opening. We have it's almost like we have the 3 churches, 3 candidates. There's a Holy Trinity thing going on here. And I also really like that the episode begins with a celebration, because the next 60 minutes really are something to celebrate about.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's very good. They've also, alluded to this element of the community in the past, with the power that the preachers hold over the politics, and we certainly see why that is the case here, with these churches really being cornerstones of the community here that's depicted, and everyone is obviously very dressed up and very dedicated to the occasion. Possibly this is definitely among my favourite openings in the whole show. And really shows off the heart and the political sway in these communities. And I like that each of the 3 churches has a slightly different take on Christianity. Slightly different denominations are seen for each councilman. It looks like Tony Gray is very much at the most liturgical service. It looks more of a Catholic service. And obviously Carcetti going to the most flamboyant service, where there's lots of singing and dancing and worship. So very, very good to see. And
a very powerful speech from Reverend Franklin, I thought. I mean, I don't think you have to be a religious person to be very drawn in by the whole atmosphere. And obviously, again, we mentioned the sound in the show before, but here, it really captures that ambience of the great church, and his voice really projects to us, the viewer. So, Carcetti was certainly getting into it as well, so...
Yeah, he was certainly doing a good job, and as you say, I think it's Reverend Reed Franklin. He's actually called Frank Reed in real life, and it's another case of a character who's not really acting. It's actually a senior pastor of Baltimore's Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is a real place with a real
I believe
preacher.
I think it's pronounced Episcopal.
Is it Episcopal? Sorry. Okay, right. I'll take that back. My bad, but. Yeah, so there we go, Reverend Reed Franklin. So it's really nice to see that, and obviously he's just giving possibly a sermon he's given before, but he's certainly nailing his role.
Yeah.
And it's a great, firm, and somewhat foreboding sermon. He's certainly not going light on Carcetti. He seems to be speaking directly to him in this sermon here, obviously, and I love how Carcetti seems to respond to this sermon. Or the adjectives that he's describing these men who should be leading us.
Especially as we're seeing him in shot as the Reverend is talking about Moses judging the people.
Yeah.
And there he is there. That's when we're seeing Carcetti. And I think that his slip-up at the end is actually very endearing as well, when he blasphemes. Yeah, I think that was quite good. And the response is nice as well. Moses will do for now. We'll save Jesus for your second term.
Yeah, which is quite a positive outlook. It suggests that there is lots of hope for Carcetti as far as this church is concerned.
Definitely.
So, really, really good with the pastoral. And as you say, that the speech afterwards is great. And the minister really doesn't speak up to him as a potential leader. There's very much a sense of authority from this church leader. And he is the man to learn from.
Yeah.
And he's not afraid to speak down to Carcetti like that. And it makes him all the more endearing. So yeah.
I also wanted to add
And,
something about where we see Royce as well. I mean, you're talking about the different types of services. I thought it was interesting that the church that Royce was in seemed more darkly lit and ominous. Like the first church, we're looking at the audience from above, and it's very clear and sort of not well lit. But the shot of Royce's church even, is from below, and we're looking up at the audience, and we're looking up at these ornate stained glass windows as well. And to me, when you mentioned that Carcetti's church was the lavish one, but I actually thought Royce's one was like the sort of lavish, ornate, highly, I don't know, it had a richness to it, I suppose. And the fact that it was quite dark and dimly lit made it seem a bit seedy almost. Like.
It certainly had a high church aesthetic to it.
I just thought that there was some suggestive film work going on with the visuals, and it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe they were just trying to show contrast and just contrast between the two different scenes. And maybe I'm reading too much into that bit, but it did seem like there was a more ominous, more seedy element to Royce's shots there.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely, obviously, it's there just to provide variety for the churches, but also I think it does probably relate to the outcomes of these three councilmen. Two councilmen and one mayor. And I did like the fact that you mentioned this kind of celebration, because I think that the way Tommy's service goes, very much draws ahead to that victory. And it's almost having the victory now early, particularly when you contrast it with Tony Gray's very introspective service, where he's crossing his heart and going through the Eucharist in a very liturgical way.
Yeah, all he can do is pray.
Yeah, definitely. So it feels like it makes sense that Tommy has this more celebratory service, and it's a sign of things to come for him.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Really cool. And obviously there's a very deliberate sort of racial disparity here to make it very striking and really put into perspective what it means to be the white candidate in this city. It makes a really good point of, showing what Tommy's been so concerned about throughout this campaign.
That's right, yeah. I mean, he was talking before about, waking up white in a city that ain't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you say, he's really learning what that means and having to connect with that community for real. Right, so shall we move on to the next section for the politics strand?
Yeah, pretty much. I was just literally just going to mention very quickly, I'm sure it's very obvious, but obviously there's some other strands that pop up here, which is quite nice. They draw in sort of Randy and Miss Anna, and obviously the idea that Miss Anna's bringing Randy up in a very traditional and strict way, and bringing religion into the upbringing as well, which makes sense. And obviously we see Bodie as well on the corner. Business does not stop on a Sunday morning, although the truce is active, I'm sure. And then, of course, the deacon arranges some sort of prayer meeting with the preacher. So I did like to see all of that stuff going on at the same time as all these introductions for everyone.
Yeah, it all helps to make the world feel complete, and that these are people that occupy the same city and regularly share these kind of interactions. It doesn't feel like it's just all purely for the purpose of the plot. Some of it is just there to keep the world rich, keep it realistic. They're constantly sort of seeing these people out and about, and we get very accustomed to their lives, and that's what gives it a documentary-like feel, is there's a lot of incidentals going on, and it all works really nicely, just makes you really believe you're watching a whole city.
Definitely, yeah. None of it feels forced. That they use just the right balance of characters so that it all feels very naturally meshed together, which is good. And I did want to add one more thing as well, actually. I've got a lot to say about this scene. During the pastor's speech, he makes it clear that the key to ruling is having a body of leaders in your council that you can trust, which, if you think ahead, is kind of ironic, because you consider that Carcetti actually ends up keeping Burrell against his initial desires, because the ministers have such a special connection to him, despite what's being said. So I thought that was one interesting lack of pragmatism, perhaps, with these ministers. But yeah, so there we go. And I did love Carcetti's kids just bobbing back and forth. There was something slightly hilarious about that at the time.
All right, so ready to move on?
Yeah.
So Carcetti campaigns in the downtown area with Wilson. He's greeted by a science teacher from Baltimore County who agrees with his policies, but is not a city resident and therefore not eligible to vote in the city's election. Then Watkins comes over to show Carcetti a flyer he has found. It claims that Carcetti once defended a notorious slumlord named Bobby Harrison from prosecution over his poor treatment of his tenants. Harrison is hated throughout Baltimore, and the flyer even has a photograph of the two together on the courthouse steps. Wilson recognises the flyer as a last-minute smear attempt, as Carcetti realises that the photo is a fake, and becomes pessimistic about his chances of winning in the face of such tactics. Jerry and Wilson immediately start to formulate their response. At the follow-up meeting, D'Agostino mentions she has a printer on retainer and plans to produce counter-literature. Wilson offers to use his contacts at the Baltimore Sun to find the original photo of Bobby Harrison and thereby prove that the photo is a fake. Carcetti remains agitated and his staff urge him to carry on with his schedule whilst they deal with the problem. Later, Tommy and Jen watch TV news coverage of the controversial flyer. The news reports that Carcetti and Royce are in a dead heat, while Gray trails. Jen asks about the flyer and Tommy tells her about his staff's positive response. So this is the arc of the flyer, if you like, in the politics strand. Starting off with them in that downtown area. I really like the discovery of the smear scene. It's quite nice how it just turns up and suddenly, Carcetti seems to go into a bit of a meltdown like we've seen him go in places before. It feels like there are a lot of instances in this episode that harken back to early moments with Carcetti when we very first saw him trying to understand what it was to run for mayor. And this is another one of those moments where he almost has a bit of a meltdown just because of the smear. And as Wilson suggests, they are professionals and they do know how to handle it, and they're very calm and they know how to respond immediately. And I really like this scene, just kind of seeing the counsel that they're providing and thinking back to the first scene where we're hearing about having, like you say, a council of people that you trust.
Yeah, no, very, very good. And as we see, as you mentioned, Tommy's very hot-headed here, hot-headed even. And as he was doing earlier, it's very, very small. Not that a smear is small, but it's very much isolated incidents that cause him to really become agitated and anxious. And he's not quite got that sort of strong head that I'm sure he'll develop as a mayor yet. And it clearly shows that he's new to the game. And obviously, his professionals are there to deal with this stuff in the way they've been used to. And he shouldn't be doing any of it at home, as Norman Wilson mentions later on. So it is nice to see, and I like how the actual response to the flyer is very well detailed, if not very well explained. So I like how later on you can actually see the retaliation flyer that's put out. It's actually one of the ones that Randy hands out around the houses. Yeah. And if you pause it and you can have a good 5-minute read of that flyer, you can read every word on the page, and it's a very, very good response, and you get to see the two original photographs that we assume Norman dug up at the Baltimore Sun.
Yeah, we do get a bit of exposition about Wilson working at Sun Papers for 22 years, and that helps strengthen their defence against the smear.
Yeah,
and obviously, really good, teasing us for what we see in season 5. Obviously, we can now know that Wilson is a character who spent some time working at the papers and has now moved up to this new position where his knowledge, within the world of journalism has allowed him to become effective as a political strategist. And we see in season 5 how certain characters will move on to other things from the newspaper. So it's nice to get a little tease of that early on.
Definitely, yeah. Obviously, the smear is horribly photoshopped, and Tommy's quick to blame Royce. The show never really expands on whether it was Royce. It probably wasn't. It's hard to say. Obviously, if Delegate Watkins was still with Royce, I'm sure he'd be hanging his head in shame even further. He'd have gone completely off the rails. But so good to see.
Well, all Royce says in response is that it must have been a freelancer or something. That's kind of the only response that's given.
I feel like that scene's paid off when we see Kima and Norris discuss their idea to respond to the dogging of the witness case, where they try and mess some stuff up, and that comes very much at the same time to try and illustrate who these freelancers might be. It's just people in the system looking to shake things up who aren't really allied with anyone particularly.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice that they showed that to give us an idea.
And I also thought that Aidan Gillen was very good in the scene with Jen and talking about his inability to be resigned anymore. We really saw there and his change in how before, as he's constantly being built up as this underdog, we can see how he's changed from realising that he could win and coming this close and having to deal with the fact that it it wasn't a certain defeat anymore and couldn't feel comfortable about that, and also, like I say, couldn't feel resigned anymore. It wasn't within him. He was so close to victory that actually now he really did want it, and I thought he portrayed that really well. It's a good performance.
Yeah, what a way to raise the stakes and make us even more excited, really, about the whole impending election, and really good to get us nostalgic, even about, only a few episodes ago. Back in episode 2 of this season, Carcetti was at the opposite of where he is now, and he's so driven. He's now using his sleep time to come up with his own campaign tactics, as we'll see later. And so, yeah, really, really good to see him so determined now, and he's within reach, and yeah, he just gets across that determination very, very well. And he also mentions it's all in the game, which I believe is possibly the first time someone outside the street has mentioned that phrase. I'm not too sure. It doesn't sound too shoehorned in the way he uses it.
No, I don't think so, no.
In reference to the smear, so...
And obviously we're seeing a little bit more of Jen than we normally do. Normally she just pops up little bits here and there, but she actually appears probably more in this episode than any other episode I can think of.
Yeah, I think you're right, yeah. Not that we see much more of her because of that, but we see that she is the very, very loyal support system for Carcetti. And that she is very unwilling to get involved with what he does. But she is very much in love with him and very much willing to support him morally through it. Yeah, really, really good to see her.
So yeah, like you say, we don't really learn a whole bunch about her. Just continues to, like you say, maintain the loyalty. Unfortunately,
Certainly,
later
yeah.
on, Carcetti repays the favour. Maybe he has learned something.
Oh dear.
But we will get to that. Are you ready to move on to our third and final politics section?
Yes, let's do it.
So in the morning, Wilson arrives to pick Tommy up, but finds he has already left for the office. Wilson finds Tommy second-guessing their strategy and advises him to follow the advice of the staff he's hired and appear on the morning talk shows that have been booked. Carcetti later returns to the campaign headquarters after his radio appearances, feeling more positive. He's still concerned about the smear campaign, however, but Wilson has news that State Senator Clay Davis is interested in supporting Carcetti. But as usual, he's more interested in how much money he can make out of it. Carcetti is dubious about working with Davis, but Wilson convinces him that it may tip the balance. Carcetti and Wilson meet Davis in a restaurant, and Clay offers to split his support between them and the mayor for $20,000. Carcetti and Wilson agree to pay him, but leave without eating. So starting off with, I guess the first bit is where we have Norman sort of bumping into Jen, expecting Tommy. Not really a whole lot to say about that bit. There is a weird audio editing bit in it where one part of Jen's voice just seems to like cut off. She's like, he went to the office, and then it like cuts off really awkwardly. I don't know if it's like a take that they've sewn together. Every time I hear it, it sounds wrong to me.
Okay, no, that's weird. I can think of one where like Frank Sobotka starts laughing and it sounds very much dubbed in. But I didn't notice it that time, I've got to be honest.
All right. Yeah. That one gets me, that does. But obviously from there we move on to the campaign headquarters for Carcetti. Clearly been there quite a while, in a bit of a frantic state, trying to figure everything out rather than letting his campaign team do that job. Which, as Wilson says, they are professionals, they know what they're doing. And this is proven throughout the whole episode. They really do provide some really good advice, and they know how to respond, and they act as very loyal and encouraging supporters for Carcetti. And yeah, we get our epigraph, of course, which we'll talk about more later. But it is a very endearing thing. We see a lot of Wilson sort of... he basically seems to treat him a bit like a child, but in a friendly way.
Yeah. And in his position as the professional, he kind of has to. He has to distance himself from the power that he kind of holds at this stage and be the one presiding over it. And as you say, like, this episode is proof more than any other that these guys are absolute professionals, and it's their very deft moves that really excel him in the last moments of this election.
Especially with the set it up. I already did. You know, it's like kind of patting him on the back and saying, don't worry, son, we've got you.
I'm giving you the illusion of choice here, but in reality, I've actually planned out
Yeah,
everything.
this
for
has
you, sort of
already
thing,
been
like,
sorted for you.
Yeah. And in the same way that he drags him away from that computer in the morning without any second question, really.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a time when Carcetti would have fought them, as we saw early in the season, that he was quite against them at times. He really had to fight with them to as they put them through his paces, but we see now that he trusts them enough to really just go where they lead him.
I thought it was nice when Carcetti re-enters the office after he's done those radio spots, and there's like this interesting camera movement. It kind of glides a little awkwardly around the table, but it goes well with, we see this book being thrown into shot and then Carcetti storming in, and then it brings us to an about turn to see Wilson enter. It's like quite an intense, sudden shot around this table as Carcetti comes in, and it brings us all the way around to face the door again, so we can see Wilson come in. It's nicely done.
And of course, it feels like an appropriate time, as this episode does, to make an allusion to the fact that Norman will become a key figure in the administration. I'd think about using you as my chief of staff, or whatever he says to him. And of course, Norman doesn't really commit at this stage, but he doesn't, opt out of it in the same way that perhaps Terry does. Of course, she runs a mile at this stage. So, very, very good to see the development of Norman in this episode.
And we also get a bit of Clay Davis, of course, who is so deliciously charming and evil.
Unbelievable what he can get away with.
Yeah, it's insane. He kind of reminds me, I don't know if you've seen this, if you know about Dungeons and Dragons, the alignment chart that you get. Do you know about,
the
do you know about
morality
this?
chart, is it?
Yeah, it's like a
You have, like,
morality
neutral,
alignment
good,
chart, and you kind of have neutral and lawful and chaotic, and
Yes,
evil
that's
and
right.
good, But there's one for The Wire. There is a good one for The Wire, and it has all these characters in various slots. And, of course, Omar is true, neutral, and right in the centre. And then you have... trying to think... you have lawful evil, which would be Stringer.
Would that not be... He's unlawful, though, right? Oh, no, lawful in the sense that he tries to follow rules and go legitimate.
Yeah, in that sense. Doesn't necessarily mean follows, governmental law. It's more like sort of...
Yeah.
To have a code of some kind.
Definitely.
Whereas
McNulty
Clay Davis,
is
chaotic evil, of course.
Yeah. And McNulty's chaotic good.
That's right, yeah. He will just do anything to do what he thinks is the right thing, even if it means screwing other people.
Although I have seen a different version of that chart where Marlo is the chaotic evil. But I think you could argue for either case there, definitely. Unbelievable that he gets away with this sort of thing, and he obviously has this power that's been very established throughout this government, and it's this fact alone that he can cause them to take a 20,000 punt on Clay in this way as they do. And Carcetti and Norman don't seem surprised at all by this, really, when they turn up, and it's treated as very much a standard issue cost for each election that comes along. I guess they're surprised at the beginning, but Clay, Norman's already set it up. He knows that they have to take a punt on this, even if it's going to cost them 20,000.
Yeah, they accept right at the start that all they have to lose is money, so they already accept that they've lost it before they even go to the meeting.
Yeah. And he again then steps over the line yet again at the end when he says leave enough for the tab.
Yeah.
Very much Clay Davis humour, where it's you can see the humour, but it's kind of revolting, really. Like, you've just swiped 20,000 for completely illegitimate reasons, and you won't even stay true to your word, and now you're just rubbing it in.
Yeah.
So
and later on he even says that he let him off easily, or let him off lightly.
Yeah, he could have had him for double, which is again like his other Sting moment, which is just like, oh, Clay, you are just a piece of work.
He is a real piece of work. I mean, no one said that about Valchek last week, but surprised he didn't say even worse about Clay.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. So it makes sense that he does have his comeuppance in season 5. He is really at the apex of the evil in this show. Arguably Marlo is a different kind of evil. Obviously his evil does lead to death, unlike Clay's, but you could certainly say that I don't know, it's very hard to argue really, but Clay really is up there as an absolute filthy character.
Yeah, like you say, it's a different kind of evil. It's they're somewhat on par in that way, in their own worlds.
Yeah.
Right, so shall we move on to our next strand then?
Yep, let's do it.
So what we have now is the Barksdale remnants that I mentioned before. I'm going to do this all in one so that we can talk about it as a whole. So, Namond and his mother Delonda visit Brianna Barksdale at her home, where Delonda hopes that she may have work for Namond. Brianna says she has actually called the meeting to tell Delonda that she is cutting them off, feeling she has amply compensated them for WeBay's support, and with the collapse of the Barksdale organisation there is no longer any income. Brianna tells the mother and son that she wanted them both to be there, so that there could be no lies told about her decision. At home, Delonda tells Namond he is going to start dealing drugs to bring in money for the both of them. She still refuses to let him drop out of school, but insists that she will convince Bodhi to give him a package. Namond asks about what Brianna meant when she said that they had been given enough money already, and Delonda tells him that Brianna was lying. Delonda then phones an ambivalent WeBay to tell him what has happened.
Yeah, so our first glimpse back at the old guard, the Barksdales again.
That's right. What is left of it anyway? And we have Brianna being straight up with Delonda and Namond. And it's interesting that compared to Delonda, Brianna seems like a good mother. You know, she seems like kind of an honourable lady to some extent. And we're talking about someone who talked her son into spending 20 years in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, she knows that Delonda will try to lie to Namond as well, which is a nice touch.
Definitely, yeah. She's certainly a smart cookie. Good that she comes back. Certainly a good way to... I think this is her last scene in the show, actually. So a good way to send her character off and kind of twist it at the end. And as you say, it's nice that she is put in the same room as Delonda, and we can see this idea of the diminishing standards on the street for what constitutes integrity and the rest of it. And she looks really good next to her. And it's really nice that they address this issue of what happens to these remnants. And obviously the money is stopped. The Barksdales are no longer a power. They're shifting. And what does this mean for the street? And it's a nice way of creating a convincing circumstance to push Namond even further down his trajectory into this really forceful street-focused life.
Yeah, it simultaneously provides a nice bit of closure for what's going on with Brianna and, like you said, the sort of what's left of the Barksdale organisation. And also leads us into what's happening with Namond and his mother. And, of course, this brings us in to what an incredible thing that Delonda is asking of her son. I know we've mentioned before that maybe Namond is someone who's the least, he's not as easy to sympathise with to some extent because his condition and his status isn't quite so dire as, say, Dookie's. But I do sympathise with Namond here about how poisonous Delonda is. When we're looking at a smart kid and her reaction is to talk only of his ignorance, and instead of taking responsibility herself, she demands that he step up in order to safeguard her lifestyle, which is just unbelievable. She's not sort of going out to get a job herself. It's just this assumption that you're the man of the family now. You have to go out onto the corner where it's dangerous. Oh, don't worry, you're going to stay in school, but you also have to be a drug dealer, and I want you to actually ascend up the ranks, and I'm going to sit here and enjoy the spoils of it all, which is just awful, and I really do feel sorry for Namond having to deal with this situation. If if you weren't fortunate enough to end up in this program with Colvin and see a little bit more of outside the bubble, then who knows what kind of long-term mental damage might be being done.
Yeah, definitely. It is pretty despicable what goes on here. And yeah, it's just Brianna having become too adjusted to this life where she lives large off the riches of drug dealing. And there ain't no way she's going to stop it now. She's latched on to the Barksdale teat. Definitely, and the circumstances are changing very, very rapidly for her. And so a big change for these guys. We see, Delonda just having put all her eggs into one basket, cruising on WeBay's assumed reputation, and she assumed that it would remain in its position. And WeBay's not really changing, but the way his name rings out on the street certainly is. It's not bringing in the bacon anymore. It's interesting how he's very uninterested by what she has to say about this. He's clearly not following the 1 day in and 1 day out policy that the Barksdales seem to have, and he's certainly letting this prison life kind of usurp his importance to the outside world, almost sort of as a wise new man. And of course, life imprisonment is not worth waiting through to resume outside activities. So it makes sense that he'd be very much resigned to the internal fishbowl of the prison, and what's going on out there isn't too much of a concern to him. So
this is just another part of his routine. Every now and again, Delonda will call him up and give him a tale.
Yeah, he has to just sort of take an ear bashing for a bit.
And it must sound pretty ridiculous, even without the same kind of context that we know compared to Weebay's situation, because I think she compares the situation with Brianna to them coming home to discover that they're evicted or something, which is quite an extreme way to put it when you are, essentially being gifted money for something that somebody else has done.
Yeah.
They're getting money off the back of Weebay's support, and he's in prison, and then she's trying to continue to swan around enjoying other people's money.
It is a real rotten attitude, isn't it? And Weebay certainly understands this and doesn't fight it, but he kind of accepts it and just shrugs it off. The one thing that is quite endearing about it is he's still very much interested in having Weebay, at least caring for Weebay's livelihood. Sorry, not Weebay, Namond. Obviously, he wants him to step up to the streets like his mum does, which doesn't bode particularly well. But at least he does seem to care about his son in a way that he doesn't about Delonda. Yeah,
that's right. And I guess that is one thing that he may want to try and keep up to date with for the outside world, outside the fishbowl, like you say, of the prison. He is reaching out for that, but all the rest of it, there's no real reason for him to try and get involved.
Yeah.
Certainly no motivation with Delonda, it seems.
Certainly, yeah. And quickly going back to, I guess, the circumstance that led them to this point, it's quite nice how Stringer had a role in this too. Brianna's incentive to give the Bryce's handouts is gone now because she has so little respect for Avon, which of course links back to D'Angelo's death, courtesy of Stringer. So it really has quite a complex multi-season arc that fuels all this stuff. And as our listeners have reliably warned us here, D'Angelo's story is yet to be over. And again, this brings up another D'Angelo reference, as Brianna very, very coldly says, I couldn't give a shit about Avon anymore. So there's a lot of Barksdale politics that's shifting and causing these guys to be on the losing end of it. And I think it's really nicely demonstrating how Brianna's role has always been the link between the business and the families who get to live in comfort because of the drug trade. And it's nice to be shown more of this, very consistent with all we know about her and why she was the one who was so upset about D'Angelo. And we see that, she had a very important role, really. When it comes down to it, she was overseeing a lot of where the money went when it came into the business, as it were.
That, and ensuring this sense of, family, ensuring that it was closer knit than just some business. They were there to protect one another as a family, first and foremost.
Definitely, and it's so consistent with her. I mean, one of the lines that rings out in my head for Brianna is when she mentions to Dee, where would we be without this game? We'd be down in the terrace living off scraps. And that kind of is what she is to their business. She's the one who translates the drug dealing in the ghettos to an actual kind of middle class, fairly wealthy life for the families that are involved with it.
Yeah, brings it home.
Yeah.
Not supposed to try this shit at home, so says Norman.
Yeah.
But they did.
Yep, that's true. And of course, Delonda, to be fair to her, she's not, she's not a dumb cookie. She puts up a fight. She obviously brings up the whole snitching card. Weebay can go and snitch for them, and that'll of course give them the leverage to keep the money coming. But unfortunately, Weebay has got far too much respect for Avon to go anywhere near that.
That's right, and Brianna deconstructs it as well, saying, where's he going to go and who's he going to tell? He's just he's just a lifer now, so.
Yep, definitely. And I think the one last thing I'll mention is they put the Delonda and Naaman discussing their changing circumstances right next to Carcetti and Jen, in the evening discussing their changing circumstances.
That's right.
I
Yep.
don't know if you thought there was a bit of a parallel going on there.
Yeah, no, I
guess
actually I was going to mention that as well. The fact that we have, I guess it's different because you got mother and son and husband and wife, but it is still a couple of some kind, like you say, discussing the way that things are changing for them or could be changing for them if they don't do X, Y, and Z. There's definitely a comparison there for sure.
Yeah, and they're both discussing this idea of loss, really, the loss of a chapter in their lives, really, I guess, more than anything. Not necessarily financial for Jen and Tommy, but it is certainly going to be a big change for them. Although when you consider how central Tommy's been to that family so far, I'm not sure it's going to be too much of a change for Jen, but yeah, it certainly makes sense that they'd put those scenes next to each other.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to mention about this bit for the Barksdale remnants? Then we do get a little bit more of Delonda and Namon later on.
Yeah, that's right. When they go to see Bodhi, don't they? I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but I do like the fact that she brings up Bodhi here. Obviously, Bodhi's one of the only Barksdales that is relevant to us, but also he'd be one of the only characters relevant to Delonda. He's one of the old guard that she'd remember and at least have some respect for. So it's all very consistent storytelling.
All right, so next up we're going to take a look at the Major Crimes Unit. Once again, I'm going to do this all in one go because it's only it's a relatively small bit. So Sidner continues.
It's kind of the comic relief, isn't it? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was just saying it's kind of the comic relief chapter for this episode, really.
It is, yeah. It is kind of like that. Mainly just because of it's shenanigans, isn't it? Basically, this is a shenanigans arc.
It's another epic Herc fuck up.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's hear it.
So Sidner continues surveillance work on Marlo Stanfield's outdoor hangout. His sergeant, Herc, arrives with some coffee and urges him to keep at it despite the absence of anyone to watch at the time. Later, Sidner sees Stanfield, Chris, Snoop and Monk and some other Stanfield lieutenants. He sees them talking. Stanfield takes a phone call and talks about picking up a skinny girl from New York and then insists on doing it himself. Herc rewatches the video with Sidner and a lip reader. She correctly follows the discussion and Herc interprets that Stanfield is picking up cocaine from New York. Sidner is surprised that Stanfield would go near a package of narcotics himself, but Herc is insistent. Herc follows Stanfield to Penn Station. He has the transport police pick up Stanfield when he meets with a woman and carries her bag. The woman asks who Marlo is and tries to resist his attempts to help her, and shortly after Marlo is led away by the police with a knowing smile on his face, and with the lady he was helping, quote-unquote helping, being led away. Upon searching the bag, the police find only women's clothes and are forced to release the both of them. So we're starting off with... it already starts off with comic relief, like you say, with the pointless surveillance continuing. It's kind of nice to be watching it knowing that it is a waste of time and that we are going to, like say, see some shenanigans. It is actually this bit here at the very beginning where we see them starting this or continuing the surveillance work. It's a bit of an odd short bit at the start of the episode. We actually end up rejoining Carcetti very quickly, so we kind of had that big opening section with the sermon and, seeing all of the three candidates. And then right after the credits, there's this really, really short bit where we rejoin them and see them doing the surveillance work, and Herc's just like, keep it up. And then that's it. It's a really short bit, and then we're straight back with Carcetti again. In terms of like the context of the chronology, it's a bit of an odd short bit right at the start of the episode.
Definitely. I do like to look for meanings, though, when they do layer certain scenes on top of each other, and they're clearly perhaps drawing an idea of how frenetic some lives can be and how kind of monotonous others can be. And, Sidner's really getting the short shrift here as Herc is doing what he did last time and being a bit of an arse and having some assumed seniority and leaving him there all day long to watch a bloody camera that won't go anywhere. And it's clearly getting quite cold in there, and Herc's just sort of milling around and checking up on him every couple of hours. So already we're off to a pretty bad start with Herc.
And then Marlo takes his phone call with the skinny girl from New York, and I think once you spend a bit of time with Marlo, you can actually appreciate how funny he is with this phone call. Yeah, that is clearly a fake. With the don't want nothing to go wrong. Like it's actually quite cleverly done. I mean, Chris
He has
is
a real
cracking up
understanding
as
of
well, isn't
comedy.
he? Like,
Yeah.
this is how
And,
bold this guy is. He's so bold. They just literally do it to fuck with them. And again, it's a small parallel with what's going on with Norris and Greggs and doing small things just to fuck with people. Like, and
Definitely,
actually
yeah.
diverting a lot of resources as a result, you know?
It's certainly funny. I think there's an element as well to the scene of it being funny because Marlowe's crew are on the whole generally so emotionless and cold. It's not particularly clear necessarily that this whole conversation, right from the point Marlo asks them about the time, whether it's staged or not. I think the first time I went through it, I did kind of assume this was just a general conversation. And the Marlos are known, the Stanfields are known to communicate like this. It's all very clinical and to the point. But you know, with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, it becomes very hilarious once it becomes clear at the start.
Absolutely, yeah.
That these guys are just fucking with them from the very beginning, and they're not even trying to play it natural, as you say. That they're making some very, very obvious kind of catchphrase lines, and they're really holding back their laughter quite heavily, and you know, very calculated. They know that people that are stupid enough to put a camera there and making a massive racket in the middle of the night are also going to be stupid enough to fall for this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
If they knew that someone of the likes of Freeman was still watching, of course they wouldn't dare go near a scam that was this heavy-handed. So
Just saying the things
again,
they're saying in a way, where you realise, like you say, especially on repeat watchings, and you understand the characters more, and the fact that they're even discussing it is out in the open is just, makes it obvious that it's a fake.
yeah,
I do like
And-
that Sidner is sceptical. Now, obviously, he's a bit smarter than Herc when it comes down to the real investigative stuff. But Herc, of course, always has answers. I mean, not necessarily the right ones, but he does always have some kind of answer to the question.
Yeah, I think the way of looking at it is that Sidner seems to ask perhaps some of the right questions, and Herc is just very forceful with his rationalizations.
Yeah.
And it's set to fail really. As much as in Herc's head, it's certainly going very well, and in Sidner's, there's elements of it working, but you know, he certainly sees the flaw of him being on the phone just like that. Silly that Herc wouldn't pick up on that at all. And I think one of the most silly things about it is the way Marlo knows where the camera is, and he spends the entire conversation not looking at his comrades, but he stares right into the lens of the camera the whole time. And he's just completely going for it, and they don't pick up on it at all.
It's also strange once we get to the station itself, and we see them enacting the prank, if you like. It's strange to hear Marlo say such nice things with that sister when he's like, I'll wait with you and make sure you're safe. It's just a really strange thing to hear Marlo say because of how cold and brutal he is.
Obviously, the Stanfields use these niceties as ways to exploit people, but mainly that's Chris's domain, as we saw last week, helping the delivery lady again with her luggage. So this is another situation where it won't result in death this time, but it's always for some sort of fairly unsavoury ends, even if it is quite a nice means.
Yeah, it's always leads into something a bit more sinister. Again, foreshadowing what we've done a little bit with Michael. They approach him quite genially, and seems like he's been quite accommodating. But as we already discussed earlier on, there is a sinister overtone to it, and there is a sense of Michael now being trapped by accepting that money. So it's a similar idea about them, like you say, using these niceties to manipulate people or kill them.
Yeah, definitely. So,
In fact,
yeah,
makes me think that whenever it comes to any kind of, scene where they have to kill someone, there's a strange calmness and accommodating feel to them. They want the other person to accept it. Oh, I won't make it hurt none. You know, when he's with Prop Joe, breathe easy. He's always trying to reassure them in some way. It's quite creepy.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it endearing, but there's certainly, it's almost like you've mastered your craft. No one wants to really do what they do with people struggling behind it, because it just creates stress for everyone. So if you can master the art of killing people to the point where people just accept it, I guess you really have become the master. So that's kind of what they do, and they do achieve it to some extent here with what they set up in the streets. So I guess obviously, as you mentioned before, Baltimore Central Station, the only time we see it in the show. Quite a beautiful station from the looks of it, and a new location for us. And obviously the location of a very hilarious and very smart, relatively speaking, in terms of Herc stunt. So
anything else you want to cover for our major crime unit's escapades in this episode?
yeah, sure. I'll just quickly mention more about the stunt, I guess. Obviously, Herc decides not to go in and be the hero who arrests Marlo. He almost does have a glimmer of long-term thinking there. He's refusing to be part of the bust, despite how much the show has taught us that's what he lives for in this job. And obviously, Freeman would want to stay away from people so that he could then have a card to play on them later. And he seems to want to do that himself and come back and surprise them in court. Obviously, he won't get there, but there are occasionally elements where he doesn't think so clearly about the very easy, sort of obvious option, as he did here with just turning up at the station or just hiring the lip reader. Like it's all these very basic shortcuts that he shouldn't probably be making. And I thought that Marlo got perhaps a little bit lucky with the skinny lady. Not only is she skinny, as he didn't necessarily predict, but she just sort of puts her bag down on cue like that in front of him. But hey, I guess we'd sense he'd have easily improvised some other way of doing this if that didn't happen. So it's not particularly major moment or major point.
Yeah, it doesn't come off as jarring in any way.
No.
I guess it's also worth saying that it's very much like that with Herc. Like you're saying, how he isn't a complete idiot, but that's the problem. It shows that a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, especially where Herc is concerned.
Yeah.
He applies himself only a little bit to the situation, and that gives him enough confidence to believe that he now knows exactly what's going on and has all the answers. And even though he can make calls, such as that one where he's going to surprise him at the bail review instead, it's ultimately fruitless because it's based on a load of nonsense.
Definitely, yeah. It's the problem is that he doesn't necessarily have. Obviously, I mean, he's got a lot to learn, but that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is that he has such a desire to be this authoritative figure and to be this senior person, and it's that kind of ego coupled with that, that patchy knowledge that really does lead them down some pretty dangerous paths. And I don't think we've seen one of it yet, but there are a few things the Herc does in this show later on that really have massive consequences in other parts of the show that he genuinely has no idea about. So we're going to see how his newfound power, much of it afforded, of course, by Royce and the whole blowjob thing, can really start causing some power across ripples of the show. So
That's right.
Yeah, at this stage it's still small scale, but just wait for it. And of course, there's that final scene where Herc realizes what's happened. He's been duped, and it's great. And the immediate next line following Herc being, finding out about this is, from what he says, he was just a go-between. He delivered a message. He told the victim to be at a certain place at a certain time, and that was spoken by Carver, which is obviously referencing Lex and Randy and Chris and Snoop, but it oddly, weirdly ties into that situation there at the station. So points out some interesting similarities anyway between the situations. And I guess it's also a nice way of putting Herc and Carver back to back and seeing how their trajectories have changed.
Oh yeah,
and how
that's very true. Yeah, I mean, seeing them next to each other, you see how differently they have approached their rise.
Yeah, with Carver handling very expertly what's quite a difficult and sensitive situation with Randy here, and Herc completely flunking what should be a fairly basic investigation for a detective.
Yeah.
So definitely keeping it strong with the changing trajectories. Okay.
Let's move on to homicide then. So Detective Greggs receives news from her partner Ed Norris that a prisoner has offered information on their case in exchange for a deal. And of course they're still working on the politically significant murder of a state's witness named Braddock. Norris hopes to move on the information quickly to have an impact on the election. Not to sway voters, but for a bit of fun to act out against the politician's earlier disruption of his work. Later, Deputy Commissioner Rawls arrives unannounced at the unit headquarters, which surprises Detectives Crutchfield and Hartley. Rules visits Jay Landsman and explains the political danger of allowing a break in the Braddock case on the eve of the election. He then orders Landsman to detail Greggs and Norris to uniform duty at the election polls. We have Norris wanting to kick up a storm in an act of revenge, kind of like one of these freelancers that you mentioned earlier. It's nice that he wants to get back at them for the way that they interrupted his case. It seems very petty, but the implications are massive, and it shows how there are a lot of people in these positions of power, but sometimes all it can take is one disgruntled person in a position of minor influence to pull out one card and the whole thing comes tumbling. They're able to have quite a massive impact. Kind of like with Herc, like you said before, characters that sometimes they don't even know, but they can have these big impacts on the world around them. But with obviously Norris, it's very intentional.
Yes, definitely. And I think there's a bit of meta storytelling going on with the fact that, as we discussed before, Norris is obviously the ex-police commissioner.
Yeah, played by the man.
The man himself, and obviously he has some involvement in politics for that reason. Burrell, what we've learned about Burrell in this show is as much as evidence as we need about the politics of that position. And obviously here he is being the kind of rogue, let's mess up the system person. So, he even says he doesn't vote. Fuck no, I don't vote. And obviously they're trying to really subvert what that guy stands for in the real world, which is quite interesting. And he's forcing Kimiko against what we know are some very strongly held principles by her. She's one of the very straight arrow spectrum cops in The Wire, and we can see the discomfort on her face very clearly there. But then again, Norris makes a good point. It would be the least she deserves at this point, and I think she also respects that. Her face does a very good job of communicating both those emotions.
I also like just the way that Norris speaks in a way. Like, when he asks Greggs for the name, she says Braddock. He continues as though he was never interrupted. She says Braddock, yes. And he goes, was killed. Just kind of as if he was never stopped in the first place, which I kind of like.
He's trying to force a headline there, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then we have Rules suddenly turning up and giving a bit of a surprise to Crutchfield and Holly. And they talk about they don't like it when they sneak below the 6th floor. Is it the 6th floor, I think he says?
Something like that, yeah. And obviously that's a bit of a callback to, I guess, season 1 and 2, where Rules, this was his stomping ground, this 5th floor or wherever they are now. And he's certainly looking older than he was then. He's looking more stressed. He's looking more worn down by the job, more angrier. Angrier at least. And it's kind of cool to see him suddenly stroll back in, and obviously for a very different and more important purpose than he was dealing with before. It's no longer about Judge failing tip-offs and old murders being reopened. It's all about this political drama that is much more significant, and pulling some real strings and, juking the democracy, as he puts it.
It's also worth mentioning Crutchfield needing a moment just to unclench his arsehole, as he says.
Yeah. They love their arsehole jokes down here in the homicide office.
That and leathery voices delivering them.
Yeah, I like the fact that there's quite a few detectives. Obviously, Bunk's the only real one, or at least consistent detective in the show that we really get to know. But, Vernon and Norris and Crutchfield and... are there any others? I think there's one in season 5 that we get to know as well. But I do like that there's a few people that have just enough character to be quite memorable, and they really make this homicide office feel quite active and alive. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Rules delivers a bit of a political schooling to Landsman. Obviously, Rules is clearly in the loop. He knows exactly what's happening in each of his unit. He's obviously demonstrated an ability to keep his finger on the pulse, and he knows what's going on here and knows when to step in when he understands the political implications. But we also see experience from Landsman as well, because he plays right along as soon as the penny drops. Or should that be as soon as the chip falls? I think "fuck your falling chips" might be one of my favourite Rules lines ever. That is a Rules golden line. Fuck your falling chips.
Oh dear, Rules, yeah. No, he's pulling some real strings here, and obviously he's having to do somewhat what Burrell... He's filling Burrell's shoes to some extent. He's making these big decisions. that affect the politics of the policing rather than the policing itself. And we see this under different circumstances, though. This time he's trying to keep the department neutral under both potential mayors. And it's a very, very smart manoeuvre.
Yeah.
And despite having aligned himself with Carcetti verbally to his face, he's still left himself open to Royce. He said to Royce, I'm happy to step up, in as many words, to this position. So he really has left himself available in both positions. He's done a very, very clever job of putting himself in that position and also steering the department into that position. He's clearly got wind of, through some means, that Norris is looking to do this smear. Again, evidence that the department continually leaks like a sieve.
It's interesting also that Rawls, understanding how his career track, as it were, continues, or rather doesn't really continue as much as he wishes that it might. We see that he would actually probably be quite a good commissioner because he is very active, and unlike, say, someone like Burrell, we don't really see Burrell leave his office all that much. Certainly don't see him come down to the homicide office, but Rawls is very active and is really trying to keep an eye on things, and like you say, he's keeping things neutral, and he's playing the political game very well indeed. So it is in a way disappointing, despite how nasty he can be, that he doesn't actually end up ascending to that position, and obviously ends up being passed over first to Daniels and then Valchek.
Yeah, definitely, and definitely an idea that he's playing a bit of a Burrell game here, but he feels so different. He feels much fresher compared to Burrell. It feels like Burrell's had a bit of tunnel vision. He's been in this role too long, and the
fresh eyes. Then
exactly, it's those fresh eyes, and the political sort of strings he was pulling didn't match up to what Royce wanted. You feel like Rawls probably will be able to bring something new to the department and help out the mayor, whoever comes in next. So I don't know what you felt about that democracy comment and the third world fucks, as he puts it.
I know it's this is another great scene with lots of great Rawls lines. I know that this is a popular one as well. Let's show these third world fucks how it's done.
Yeah.
I guess it's just, they're aware of just how horribly manipulated it all is, and that it is a big game, and that the sophistication within that game is supposedly what's going to show, supposedly the way in which they're going to show them how it's done. Yeah. And that they accept that the progression, or they certainly believe that the progression of the system is not based on how free it is, but how well controlled the manipulation is. I guess there's a certain chaos to third world country dictatorships and game playing there, because people in those positions are more likely to, say, get murdered or assassinated. So they're showing them how it's done by doing a nice, clean manipulation where nobody needs to know. It's all nicely wrapped up, and everyone gets to be friends, and everyone gets a promotion, much like McNulty was saying way back when, after the meeting with Levy.
Yes.
It is very much like that, and that's how they're going to show them how it's done.
Yeah. So there we go, a bit of a catch-up with homicide and a catch-up with the overall politics of the police department, and if anything, it's getting more and more political as time goes on.
Let's move on to... let's take a break from the police for a moment and take a look at the school. So we have Prez catching his students, Dookie, Randy, Namond, and Michael, as they arrive in the morning. He asks Dookie to accompany him, and Prez shows Dookie a locker in the gym where he plans to leave him fresh clothes. He offers to wash Dookie's dirty clothes for him if he leaves them in the locker, and to let him in early in the morning so that he can shower. We also see Namond walking down the corridor with Monel and Paul, the two boys who recently had a tryst in the boys' bathroom, with a classmate named Tiff, whilst Randy stood watch outside. When they pass Tiff in the corridor, they insult her. Just rejoining the school here, starting with Prez's compassion towards Dookie going to another level. Really heartwarming here, but also a bit tough, again, from repeat watchers, knowing that Prez cannot get this attached to the kids. It's gonna, in a way, he's doing a very good thing, but he's also setting himself up for disappointment and interesting that later on, even Daniels seems to question this. Even he seems surprised that he's showing such an interest when he's a teacher. He has to take class after class. But it's also very touching that his approach to Dookie's situation.
Yeah.
So again, it's just a very tough situation, morally speaking. You know that he's doing the right thing, but also it actually affects his ability to be, at least, to have that necessary distance between himself and his pupils.
Certainly, yeah. And it really puts him in the camp of one of those characters who's all about making the difference rather than making the rank. And that's something that he's echoed before, and this really evidences it as well in this role. And he really is a very, conscientious character. And as much as this is a mistake for him, it really does, bring him up in our estimation, certainly as a character. And yeah, it's.
And then we have the starting bit with Naaman going down the corridor as well with Monel and Paul, and that's kind of kicking off a little bit of a strand here where Tiff is shamed and a different kind of smear campaign starts, this time in the school.
Yeah, some pretty grim words are spoken as Paul and Monel dismiss Tiff as they walk past her, and obviously this is after Naaman has been told to step up, and Naaman has a chance here to act up and start asserting some dominance among the kids who mean business here at the school, and he also gets involved in the name calling of Tiff, really, which she's not happy about. I think she feels very betrayed after.
Working entirely on hearsay and what he's been told by Paul and Monel, whatever story they've spun about it.
Yeah, and obviously Randy's the one who knows vague truth about it. So yeah, speaking on something he doesn't know about and something that's pretty grim. I think it's referred to as a tryst in the recap.
That's right, yeah.
I haven't come across that word before, but clearly it meant a lot to Tiff, and their dismissal of these activities is really causing her some hardship. And we get some little glimpses of her throughout the school scenes here, and it all builds up to a pretty tragic twist in Randy's story particularly, and I think we later see her breaking down and reporting to the police in the staff room. So, yeah. Yeah,
well, a tryst is an arranged meeting between lovers.
Right, okay.
But yeah, this like I say, it's the start of nice to have a different kind of smear campaign going on where various tales are being told and counter tales are being told, so nobody really knows what the exact truth is, even the person closest to it. Randy, who you already mentioned, even he doesn't know exactly what happened. Even he has a certain kind of style on the story, and he ends up getting into trouble for it. So,
yeah, I mean, he's adamant that Tiff was obviously up for it, but from what we saw that he saw, there's no way that he could have really known that. So again, as you say, it's spin from every angle. No one really knows the truth.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next little section then. Grace Sampson meets with the teaching staff to tell them of a new program within the school. Funds from the University of Maryland are being used to set up a class for kids with behavioural difficulties. 10 children will be in the first class, but more may follow if the program is deemed successful. Obviously all of this referring to the system with Colvin and Parenti. Marcia Donnelly and Grace Sampson shortly arrive in Prez's math class, where he teaches fractions. She removes Naaman, Zenobia, and Darnell. Karim asks him if they are being arrested. Donnelly moves on to pull students named Markeith, Kwame, and Latonia from a second class. And we also see Albert Stokes is also among those who are moved to the new program. Once the troublesome students are assembled, they are taken to their new classroom. On the way, Naaman notices the school security officer talking to Tiff, who is crying in the office. Mrs. Sampson, Dr. David Parenti, and Colvin introduce the concept of the special class to their new students. Sampson informs them that the program is mandatory, and Naaman draws an analogy of prison for the new class, and Colvin jumps on the comment quickly to confirm how seriously they will need to take it.
Yeah, so the imposition of the new reformed school class. And Naaman starts having to step up as pressured by him at home, and also calmed down as pressured by him at school within the same episode, which certainly sends him some very mixed messages.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, must be a bit confusing. I mean, the first bit we see is actually these rather mixed, generally positive, but also somewhat mixed response from the teachers hearing the news about this program. It's like on the one hand, it's good that they're being pulled out straight away, and that they weren't being pulled out of class at all. But also disappointment that not more of them are going. So, yeah, we kind of see a little bit of the teacher's response there.
Yeah.
And,
definitely. And, the ooh for every single pullout is quite hilarious.
Yeah,
as well.
that's right. Yeah, so that's
Without
how
fail.
kids would react. I mean, that's certainly how, if you're in a classroom around that sort of time, someone got pulled out of class by one of the head teachers, everyone would be like, "Oh, yeah." That's exactly how it goes. So.
Definitely, it doesn't matter what the school is. That's going to happen.
It's like someone falling over. Everyone has to go, "Ray!" Like, it has to be done.
And the smash plate in the cafeteria as well is
someone smashes something. Somebody somewhere within the building is going to go, "Ray!" Like, it has to be done. You drop something, it's just you've done it, haven't you?
It's just kind of an international tradition. It's sort of.
Is it international though?
I don't know. Maybe it's not, but I just feel like wherever I go, it would happen.
Do you ray when someone accidentally drops something? Write in to caughtonthewire@gmail.com.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have all these kids being pulled out, and we talked before about kids being pulled out of class a lot. It just happens even more here, although it's a bit more permanent this time. There is this obsession with prison that we see as well, of course. They have this complete assertion that that's what they must be going to prison. We can hear these kids talking in the background as they're being pulled out of Prez's class. Yeah, they must be going to prison. Where else could they possibly be going? It's a strange obsession.
Yeah, I guess for these kids, it's almost like the best possible form of respect is someone who gets locked up for a while and is able to stand strong.
Yeah.
And people that do that, Cutty, for example, they seem to have the names that ring out in many ways.
They feel like that's something that they can achieve.
Yeah, that's genuinely something to be proud of, which is very twisted in many ways.
And of course, tying into what else is going on with the school, we have them walking past Tiff's confession, where we see them talking to the school security guard. Naaman sees something that he definitely did do wrong. And then Colvin, once they're inside the program, Naaman makes this, drawing a parallel with prison, that they're somehow preparing them for it. Colvin takes a maybe somewhat unexpected approach, but I thought a quite nice one, where he makes it very clear that they are taking the program very seriously, and that they need to understand that they're not going anywhere unless they sort it out. And it ties into the mixed messages that Naaman is receiving, that he's being told to straighten himself out in two very different ways, both at home and at school. It must be difficult for him to know what to think.
Yeah, but he's going to have to play two faces even more strongly than he's been used to so far, really, if he's going to keep everyone happy around him.
It's just his whole life ends up being this one big facade after facade, and it ends up really breaking him. Especially after the incident with Michael, where he ends up beating on Kennard. I think that just kind of is clearly definitely that final straw moment where he's given up trying to pretend to be anything. He just doesn't want to be involved anymore. But we see it really starting here, and had this constant duality in his life.
Yeah. And obviously these kids are trying to intimidate the teachers, and Colvin, obviously, I think particularly as a police officer, comes back with an equally intimidating response, or an even more so an intimidating response that really does settle the kids down. And Colvin's first words to Naaman are actually solitary. That's good, son. Which is kind of two nice call forwards. Firstly, to solitary confinement that Omar will find himself in within the next 20 or so minutes. And also the idea that Colvin will adopt Naaman as a son. The very first
that's good, yeah.
sentence he says to him is, that's good, son. I mean, a lot of people do use the word son in a more general sense, but I feel like there should be some sort of intent behind that. So,
we can only assume that because it is The Wire, there are no coincidences.
I love to think so.
Right, we have one last little bit for the school, if you want to cover that now.
Yeah.
So Paul, Monell, and Randy are also pulled out of class by Donnelly. She interrogates Randy about his role in what Tiff has characterized as a rape. Donnelly knows that he was a lookout and is forced to suspend him. She rings his foster mother, Miss Anna, I should say, but hangs up when Randy tells her that he knows about a murder. Later, Prez appeals to Donnelly to let him hand Randy's confession onto someone that he trusts within the police department. More people being pulled out of class, and Randy getting the 3rd degree from Donnelly. She's put him in a difficult position once again in her, almost like, well, I suppose she's defending the school system. She's upholding the laws of the school. And she's very good at it, but it also means that she's putting Randy in a very difficult situation. And he ends up having to go too far, essentially, in his defence. Which ends up putting him in a lot of hot water with the confession. And where we've seen a lot of suggestions of where he may have to give away information and be the snitch. This is the moment where he really does go over the edge.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's obviously it was a fairly calculated move. Under the right circumstances, this wouldn't be the end for him. Obviously, we see that this story moves on to the Western District next, and they take it from there as an investigation. Carver obviously leads that, and he's very controlled with it. He's understanding of the sensitivity of the issue. It's only when Herc gets involved later on that the secret goes out on the street. So it's kind of a mixture of obviously Randy being the original, he does put it out on the street himself, technically, but he thinks he's doing it in a very controlled environment, which he is. And it's these people that have been falsely promoted into places that they can't really safely work in, a la Herc, who really does send this spiralling out of control. And I know we're jumping ahead here a bit, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about how this story is going to develop from here. So, yeah. Yeah,
it ends up that the difficulty of that situation is, like you say, just compounded even more when you get people like Herc involved, and there's nothing that Randy can do about that. So it is very much put out of his hands.
Definitely, yeah. I assume you like the scene where Donnelly, almost kind of horror movie-esque again, where she sort of stares Randy down outside the headmistress's office.
I actually thought that was a bit weird and stilted, that bit. I kind of get the effect that it's trying to have, and like she turns towards the camera, and for that moment, we are Randy, we are the naughty schoolboy, and she beckons us in. I understand that's the point, but it is a bit weird and just awkward. She kind of steps to the right, like a video game character or something. Like, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, it's very scary,
Donnelly
definitely,
bot.
and spooks the crap out of me and Randy. But I guess it needs to be done, because if she can make Randy look guilty by doing this, she knows she's onto something. It's a very important indicator of what she might get out of the conversation. So I can understand she's clearly done this for years.
Also, it's a bit like the police interrogations, isn't it? Setting a particular mood and putting them under pressure and asking the right kind of questions. Like, how do you know you weren't there? It is almost like a police interrogation.
Definitely, she goes very hard on him, and obviously she's doing her job, but at the same time we appreciate that she really is compromising Randy in a way that's much more, that's much larger than this issue, in some ways. So, quite sad overall. And as much as it feels like Donnelly is exacerbating this here, you can really attribute so many people to what's happened so far. We spoke about Herc later on, who will become a very important player in this story, but Marlo, Chris, Snoop, Little Kevin, Paul, Manel, Tiff, all these people so far have been, involved or have some semi-involvement in what's in the forward motion of this information that Randy has. So it's already become a very complex issue, and it's about to get more complex as more and more of the characters will learn about it. So
that's right. Right, so should we rejoin the police once more for our Western District strand?
Yeah.
So Lieutenant Mello briefs his incoming shift. and appeals for more officers to man the polling stations. He then introduced a fresh murder warrant for Omar Little, who is wanted for the shooting of a delivery woman in a Western District store. McNulty is sceptical that Omar would kill someone not involved in the drug trade. So just a very short first bit there. We have Omar with no known abode.
Okay, I think that possibly tops the normal impression.
I've been prepping it. Been practicing.
It just came out of nowhere. It's the last person I expected you to do an impression of. Very impressive there.
I do like that bit where it's like, was it no address, no known abode or something?
I think it's no known abode.
No known abode.
Yeah. All three words pronounced the same in the Baltimorean accent.
It's great, yeah. So yeah, it's kind of nice to have a little catch up there and meet the briefing, and we get all of the context as well. Like you say, it's just completing that world, even though it's somewhat incidental. We kind of know that that's happening. It just completes the world. He's talking about he needs people for the polling stations because obviously with election day, and then we have the murder of Omar Little. He's obviously not been murdered, but the supposed murder that he's committed. We hear about that, and it's brought on as part of the briefing, so it's nice to have that all connected. The only thing that is very silly here, and I think we've mentioned this before, is McNulty asking Colicchio if he's ever known Omar to do a citizen, which is a bit jarring, really. Why would Colicchio know that? If everyone else there is just glad to be potentially shot of him, essentially. And I feel like that McNulty asking Colicchio that is purely for our benefit, and he would just keep that to himself in reality.
I feel like you could possibly make an argument that he's really missing out on these people to share his intelligence with.
Yeah, just maybe just fishing, maybe hoping to get a good response. But I mean, you must know Colicchio better than that.
Yeah,
he seems like the worst person to. Even if he raised his hand and maybe asked Mello, that would be different. But it feels like Colicchio is a really odd choice to try and get some kind of attention. And he just shrugs as well. Colicchio unexpectedly is just like.
Yeah, I mean, he's easily the worst person in the whole room he could have asked. And you'd have thought Carver would perhaps be second best, but I'm not sure if he was there at that particular meeting. And also, I don't think he had many run-ins with Omar in the same way that Keema, McNulty, and obviously, I think it's only really those two that have really got involved heavily with Omar, really. I think Freeman has seen a little bit of him. But yeah, it's a little bit like the way Bubbles is related to them as a CI. He's very much a CI for them. So I don't think there's anyone who really understands Omar in the same way that those two do. So it seems to me that he'd even share that information to begin with. I guess he's not in a situation where he can start making his own investigations here. He has to work within the restrictions of his patrol badge. And he's lucky enough that he gets to exercise some of that later on when they arrest him. But we will get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, if you're ready, we can move on to the next much larger section for the Western District.
Yep.
So Prez meets with his old commander, which is now Western District Major Cedric Daniels, and he discusses Randy. He appeals to Daniels to prevent the boy from getting chewed up by the system. Daniels suggests that Sergeant Carver is the best person to handle Randy with discretion, but questions Prez's interest in the kid. As arranged, Carver later meets with Randy's foster mother, Miss Anna, at her home, and he explains Randy's role as an unintentional go-between in the murder of Lex. Miss Anna questions how Randy knows Lex is dead when no body has been found, but Carver tells her that Randy claims that Lex's death is common knowledge on the street. She asks about the rape at the school, and Carver explains that the school will handle it, and Randy continues to protest his innocence as Carver tries to convince Miss Anna that he is not a bad kid. Right, so it's nice that Prez thinks that Carver is an odd choice to look after Randy, which I guess he would. But as Daniel says, Carver has come a long way, and again, it's another nice nod to the progression that has been made in some of these characters compared to where they might have met other characters that they worked so closely with in earlier seasons. And we end up seeing how right Daniels is about Carver when we see him with Miss Anna. He is very measured and calm and knows how to stand up for him, does deal with it with discretion. Can't imagine Season 1 Carver would have taken it quite as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course the fact that Prez goes to Daniels in the first place as well calling back to the old authority figures. Obviously, Daniels' job has really shifted. He hasn't really got as many relevant things to do anymore. He's sort of overseeing this general western area, and I guess he's quite happy to have some other job on the side here, and they're finding ways to keep him involved in the story. He has a bit of an off-season in the same way that Minotti does, really. And very, very good that he kind of qualifies Carver's change in character. He's the one who can kind of sit back and go, well, what happened there? And if anything, Carver's change has really been too rapid. He's just developed so much experience, and the way he really maturely handles this situation with so much sensitivity towards what this information could mean out on the street, and how he really, calms down Miss Anna very well, says all the right things. Very, very expertly pulled off here.
Although it does happen, and sometimes there are people who certain things happen, and just like it flicks a switch, it releases something that was already within them. I guess that's what's happened with Carver, is that he's realised what it was that he actually wanted, and he's discarded those things that ended up being baggage put onto him by other people, particular things he should be thinking, particular perspectives he was supposed to be having. He has discarded a lot of that and become a proper authority.
Definitely, yeah. Very good to see. And what we see that it's not just Carver who understands. Miss Anna is very understanding of how the street chews people up, and the word on the street is the most important thing. And she shares these concerns.
Yeah, she knows full well that if the kids find out about what Randy knows, that could, draw a lot of attention, put him in a lot of danger.
And in this environment, you couldn't really rule murder out in some ways. So it really is a very serious implication. And
not to be taken lightly at all.
Nope. And it really makes us think back to both these instances that being referred to, obviously originally the whole Lex go-between role that he had, and then also the tryst go-between role that he had. So in both instances he was merely a vaguely involved observer, and I guess this is quite clever because it's enough of an involvement for it to seem feasible that he'd catch shit for it if people found out, but not enough for us to feel nothing but pain for the injustice of what actually happens because of it. So it really is a catch-22 situation for Randy, and they really, really set it up very well.
All right, well, I think it's time to move on to the main event, which is Election Day itself. So McNulty mans a polling station, whilst Cutty prepares for a morning jog. As he leaves, a woman comes downstairs to ask where he's going and when he'll be back. She is disappointed when Cutty is non-committal. We then see a series of shots as Cutty jogs around parts of the city as people go to the polls. We also see Gray and Royce cast their votes as well. Carcetti votes and then moves on to Highlandtown, where Wilson thinks they can flush out his base. Carcetti passes out leaflets, and as they are about to move on, a man greets him and implies that it is, quote-unquote, their turn to take over, suggesting that white politicians will be less corrupt. When they eventually return to the headquarters, Clay Davis is seen on live TV offering his full support to Royce. Carcetti is shocked that Clay has brazenly failed to deliver on his promise after having taken their money. So it's obviously we have a little montage here, mid-season montage. The Wire obviously needs a good excuse to have something like this, so it's nice that it comes from Cutty's headphones. And they don't go full whack. We do keep all of the sound effects as well. It's not a complete blanketing of music here. It's an interesting decision to still keep the normal atmosphere going.
And it's interesting to argue how diegetic this music is as well, because the show has done situations where, for example, where Prez turns on a radio, and that radio permeates across different scenes miles away from that radio. But obviously here, because Cutty is in every scene and he has those headphones on, you could always argue that we're hearing just what Cutty's hearing.
That's right, yeah.
And that includes the sounds that are kind of muffled around him.
But there are the bits where we're seeing, say, like Royce voting. We can hear the music then as well.
That is true. So
it kind of comes in and out. It's got a bit of a strange relationship there, but it makes for a more interesting diegesis, like you say, because the fact that we do see an awful lot of Cutty, so it's justified in the sense that a lot of it is based on what he hears as he's running along and the sounds that are going on around him.
Yes, definitely, and you could also apply this to the opening scene, because we only hear the music from Carcetti's church, despite the fact that we go over to Royce's and Tony's church as well, whilst that music's going on. So that's 2 uses in one episode of non-diegetic music, which I think is a bit of a record for The Wire, who doesn't like to break the rules particularly often.
And we see again Cutty spending some time with some woman. We don't know who she is exactly, but he's obviously enjoying. Well, he's able to have a bit of fun, sleeping around a bit.
Yeah, we're sort of thrown into it. It's not clear how long they've been together, or whether this is merely perhaps a one-night stand or what. But it's also not clear what he means when he doesn't answer the question about whether he's coming back. We sense it means that he's non-committal, but it doesn't really play his cards. It certainly has different priorities, and I like how it's answered a little bit later at the gym, which we will get to. But yeah, really good scene. I love the fact that Cutty is our intro character to the election day. It feels like a much needed kind of break up in the rhythm of things, and we didn't need to see everyone voting here, but it's nice that they showed it. It kind of feels like a deserving few scenes after all this waiting and the big climax they've been building up to. And they use the montage to obviously get a lot of this information over very quickly. And it's nice, I guess, that we see it from Cutty's perspective. In some ways, he's the only truly neutral observer here. He's the one who can't have a say even if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Which the show does a nice job of reminding us when he speaks to Spider a little bit later on. And I'd honestly didn't consider it the first time. You get entranced by how much of an honest character Cutty's become, and you're like, yeah, he'd cast a good vote, but of course he's been convicted. He's still on parole, we assume, so makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. We move on. Obviously, it's nice that the music kind of cuts out as Carcetti's curtain opens from his polling booth.
Yep, and then it very much becomes Carcetti's little strand for the next bit, doesn't it?
That's right. He moves on to Highland Town, where Wilson wants them to flush out their base, and some members of their base turned out to be a little bit racist. As he's passing out leaflets to people that obviously very much support him, and then this guy just suddenly turns up. We obviously have the famous Moolies quote.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this Moolies guy is that he doesn't actually seem to respond to what people are doing or saying. He just kind of completely ignores the fact that he says, "Oh, you expect politicians to steal," and Carcetti's like, "I don't actually." Just kind of completely ignores that. And their body language is quite negative, and they're kind of just looking at him, and they're a bit flabbergasted by the things that he just doesn't seem to respond. He just carry on as normal, like this is some kind of racism that is just totally blasé about. Is just used to it, perhaps. I don't know, but
yeah,
the
I guess
disgust that they
to
show is quite warranted, really, because the guy is just it's us and them. They had their turn. And he's just pointing to some random guys down the way.
Definitely, yeah, and he comes up with some arbitrary figures for how corrupt different races are, and it's just ridiculous, really. And
Moolies?
I guess they're oh dear, all these Italian slurs. But I guess it's like they're showing us a veteran corrupt politician from a different era. Perhaps from an era that was long enough ago where race played a lot more heavily into it in a different way than it does currently. Just in some ways quite funny, in some ways quite disturbing. But it does a good job of just showing a new perspective on things.
Yeah, but we don't really see Carcetti's base, the Italian Americans, as it were, his people, if you like. You want to see it in that way, like it kind of is amongst them Yeah.
And obviously he says earlier that there's not many of us left down there.
Yeah.
And the ones that are the dinosaurs. So
And we kind of see the fact that they happen to be Italian Americans doesn't really mean much for how similar they are as people and the values that they hold.
yeah.
It just highlights how kind
Definitely.
of silly that assumption is, and that kind of basis purely on geographical heritage. It just doesn't seem to add up.
Yeah. And I think we see this Mooley guy at the party.
Yeah, I was
when he
thinking that as
wins.
well. I'm sure he pops up somewhere.
I'm not sure if it is. That's perhaps a little bit of convenience. In some ways, I hope it's just some different guy who looks similar. But yeah, guess they want to just bring it full circle.
And then they end up returning to the headquarters, and I suppose maybe it is expected. Clay Davis has completely U-turned, has ended up supporting Royce anyway, and has just walked off with their money. They end up getting nothing after their little dinner. Maybe it's because they didn't have dinner with him. Who knows? Who knows while Clay Davis decides these things.
Yeah. I don't know. It felt, in hindsight, perhaps, they should have known he wouldn't want to lose. What he's got at the moment is an established arrangement of people who pay him off.
Yeah.
And changing the government would probably not be ideal for him in that situation. Therefore, you would have had to have assumed that he would want to stick with Royce first and foremost. But also for Clay, I guess it's a smart move because it makes sense to get the next potential administration used to the idea of paying off Clay. So he can then build it up again if he has to change a few people and get a few people lured into his whole pay off Clay club. It's just a ridiculous concept, but he has so much power as this senator that most people have no choice but to keep the money flowing to him. So yeah, it's really, really quite crazy and a massive betrayal, of course.
I was going to say, you start off your relationship with a betrayal that severe, and you're not going to get any trust from Carcetti's camp again.
Again, I mean, he's just so insulated. He's almost invulnerable, really, and it almost doesn't seem to make sense. And I like the fact that season 5 spends a lot of time showing us why he's so invulnerable, and it shows us not necessarily that he has the support of a lot of people, but he is so good at saying the right thing to the right audience that he can rally the support of swathes of communities in Baltimore just by sort of almost this hypnosis thing going on, and it's quite incredible, and the way it marries up with what Clay does here.
Yeah, we get a bit more insight into that a bit later on in the show.
Yeah, just a real magician in some ways.
All right, let's move on to the next bit then. So we have Miss Anna and Randy arriving at the polling station, and she's worried that the queue will make her late for work. Randy recognises Spider from Cutty's gym giving out leaflets, and he asks Miss Anna if he can stay with Spider while she votes, and she reluctantly allows him. Meanwhile, Cutty is canvassed to vote, which he obviously can't due to his perpetual disenfranchisement even, obviously from his felony conviction. Cutty also recognises Spider and tries to talk to him to find out why he's not been at the gym, but Spider runs away. Randy, finally left alone, is then given a stack of leaflets to pass out by a Carcetti campaign staffer who notices that Spider has run off. Later, Randy gets a box of leaflets to stuff indoors, and the staffer pays him up front. So Randy recruits Kennard, Donut and Dookie to help him, although Michael is not interested. Donut steals a car to make the work faster, despite Randy's objections, and the team quickly get bored, and he tells them that he will not pay them if they don't finish the job. When they realise that he's already been paid, they ask him why he's even bothering, and Randy ends up finishing the work alone after giving his friends their money. So yeah, like you say, we have Cutty turning up here. This is kind of following on from having had his little jog and spotting Spider, not quite managing to catch him. And then Randy, who we normally consider to be quite enterprising and to find his own means of making money, this one actually falls in his lap. He seems to actually attract means of making money. He's fortunate enough to be stood in the right place at the right time as Spider disappears and ends up with a cash-in-hand job.
Oh yeah. And despite how silly it might seem to give out the money up front, I guess the administrations are so desperate to have this literature spewed out everywhere that they're just, they're going to have to pay up front and forget about it for the moment, because there are big issues at hand in the polling stations.
Well, they've been spending all they have to lose as money right at the top, haven't they, with Clay Davis? So they're doing it again at the bottom, just with the grassroots stuff. Makes sense. It's just spending what money they've got right before the end, so they can guarantee they have as much chance as possible of gaining, however minor, a lead.
Yeah, and obviously Randy is on the benefiting end of this, and it's very nice to see how he wants to go into this honestly and do the work from which he's been paid to do. It's kind of hilarious how they end up stealing a car for the sake of a little honest day's pay.
Yeah.
Just to drive around the actual leaflets. Kind of completely deconstructs the whole idea. And of course, the inevitable moment where Donut and Kennard reveal themselves to be the dishonest types, and want to take the payout and run away, as we could probably predict from when he was first paid up front. And we get the sense that all of our kids, bar Namond, perhaps would have honestly gone through and done the work, I think.
Randy, he capitulates once again here, having to give in quite a lot under pressure, as it seems, of late. He has to give them their money, and like you say, there is an honesty to what he's doing. He's going to finish the job. That was what he was agreed to do. He's not just going to take their money and run. So we see an honest, good kid. And as Carver was saying, he's not a bad kid. He is right about that, in the sense that he is an honest young man.
Yep, and he goes on and does it himself, which is the best thing he could have done, really. And so not too much else to say, I guess, but a very clear demonstration of how morality is still alive if you have the right upbringing with Miss Anna.
That's right. All right, let's move on to the next bit then. So Delonda finds Namond playing video games and asks him why he's not at school. Namond explains that the election means that the school is closed. So Delonda seizes the opportunity to take Namond to see Bodhi, and Bodhi is initially unsure, but Delonda persists and uses Weebei's name to convince him to give Namond a package. Meanwhile, Michael goes to the gym, where Cutty is already flirting with another woman. Namond arrives and asks Michael for help moving his first package, and Michael refuses. Cutty tries to talk to Michael about women and then asks about Spider. Michael explains that Spider quit because of Cutty's involvement with his mother. Later, when Namond returns home, he's faced with his mother telling him that she is counting on him, and he assures her that his new corner duties were easy. But out of his mother's view, he dumps a big bag of drugs on his bed. He gets hauled out again. He's the one that has to go out on the street and earn the money for them. And it's interesting. First off, obviously, when we get to the corner with Bodhi, I like that we can hear the relevance of the drug naming continuing. So this time we've got an election day special, 2 for 2. Which is nice.
Yeah, it's really good indication of how all these factions are being tied together as well, more and more, and the whole show is practically affected by this election day. It's not just those who are politically involved. Cutty is obviously having a day that's affected by it. The kids are off school. Namond is therefore being forced onto the street more aggressively because of it. Bodhi's drug corner is marketing drugs differently because of it. The homicide cops have been pulled off duty because of it, and obviously the politicians are, having the day of their lives here. So I love how that the whole show seems to go into this election mode and makes it feel like a much more kind of cohesive episode with everything very much linked up.
And Bodhi is smart enough as well to see, as he says, why you is what you is. Namond obviously constantly being told to adopt this great figure by his mother rather than actually being provided with the knowledge that he needs in order to apply himself. And Bodhi, being that smart-ass pawn, he can see that.
Definitely, yeah. And Delonda's a good talker. You feel like if she did apply herself, she could probably be a pretty good worker. She could provide a good support for the family, but she's very much resigned to the whole idea that the man has to step up and provide for the woman. So it's pretty weird, and she certainly convinces Bodhi and exploits the whole Barksdale allegiance that I'm sure Bodhi feels very nostalgic for, to get Namond back on in.
That's right, yeah. I mean, it seems like a good time to remind him of the old days.
Yeah, show some respect for his family. So yeah, he gets Bodhi's vote. And I guess also Bodhi's not a character who can afford to be picky at this stage, really. You know, he's on the way out. He's almost becoming extinct. So,
and then obviously Namond is given his first package, ends up taking it straight to Michael, who I guess he trusts the most of being a reliable figure, but unsurprisingly, once again, Michael is not interested. And we get, as part of this, you know, maybe one of the most cringeworthy parts in the whole show, as Cutty attempts to talk to Michael about women. Yeah, boy, I do love the women. I mean, what kind of
I've been
starting
locked up
line
so
is
long. Yeah.
I like women. Do you like women?
Thing is, I like to think this is perhaps again drawing comparisons with the world before Cutty went away, and how the attitude to women has, you know, changed. But equally, you know, Michael is the wrong person to talk to about, you know, these sexual elements, and not that we've been explicitly shown yet in the show, but obviously we know that sexually Michael is very damaged from back in his childhood, and that obviously plays into this whole dress down that Cutty gets from him, and he really does pass on this judgment that seems to wound Cutty quite a lot.
I was also, it made me think back to Michael's attempts to avoid talking to Cutty when they were at the boxing match where he's trying to discuss girls with, is it Justin that they go with? He's like, he sort of bypasses the whole trading element by talking about girls with Justin and saying, oh, his girlfriend must be fine or whatever. Yeah. So Cutty is trying to find a way to connect with him, and he thinks, oh, well, you know, maybe I'll meet him on the level that he wants to be on instead, and that doesn't work either.
Yeah, I guess that's one way of perhaps trying to justify why Cutty was being so kind of weirdly forward about this whole thing, yeah. And it certainly nicely answers that question that was raised about the woman he was, you know, in the house with. That it really is just a case of him lady hopping, from the looks of it here. And yeah, he really is like getting quite physically involved with that lady as she practices her punches, despite the fact that there's all these kids hanging around. To whom he should be this role model, and it makes sense that it won't be long before he has to talk himself out of it a little bit later, and we see that it's also the fact that, you know, a lot of these women are the kids' parents, and it's really sending some strange mixed messages to them.
And Michael, much like Namond earlier, is delivering a bit of a zinger to this authority figure. He's talking about him, you know, not being an angel indeed, agreeing with him on that point, just like Namond managed to one-up Delonda, you might say, earlier, where she's talking about that she doesn't take no for an answer. And Namond says, you just did. They kind of both got their quick wit about them here.
The judgment passed on quickly, and yeah, very, very weird. I mean, there's just a few Cutty lines in the show that you're not ready for, I find, and these are certainly up there. I think "You Game Rooster" was one that really stuck out as something hilariously random from season 3. And of course, is it, yeah, boy, you know I love the women. It's just, have to see how that one lines up in Dan's assessment of impressions. But that certainly, isolated, would be one of the creepiest lines in the show, I would have no doubt.
He just stands very awkwardly alone, having this very one-sided conversation. It's just so cringeworthy. It's fantastic.
I guess they're trying to add some moral layers to Cutty, something he has lost, I guess, now being so far away from the whole Barksdale ties. Particularly with the whole Barksdale Remnants thing that came up this episode, is that he is now becoming this real role model. He's becoming this almost flawless character. And it makes sense that this would be one way of, you know, putting back some bad into the good. He likes women, but he's dedicated to his gym boys, and his attitude towards the ladies is not quite in sync with what is expected of him by the kids here and by the community. So in some ways, I guess it's needed. It's done in a very weird way.
Yeah, we can't possibly have any Wire character being spotless.
Being what? Sorry.
Being
Spotless,
spotless.
Yeah, certainly.
It's he
So-
doesn't get away with it. So yeah, it's a good, like you say, a good excuse to bring a little bit of flaw to his character, which is nice and makes for a great moment televisually.
Definitely. And quickly going back to the Naaman stuff, I guess, is obviously Naaman very quickly goes to see Michael after Bodhi hires him again. And I guess, I don't know whether it's because he's very internally frightened by the idea of going back to work on the street, or whether he was potentially asked by Bodhi if he could get Michael back on the ticket as well.
Yeah, it could be
And that would
both or one or the other.
that would certainly be a feasible explanation. It would certainly ease the pain for Naaman of stepping up to this, and he'd have someone to share the burden with. So again, a very logical leap, a very, very logical kind of know the character so well at this point that we can just kind of predict that. I do like the fact that Naaman spends a lot of time as well sort of trying to zone out and escape things in his room. It's almost his sanctuary, and he listening to Metallica in his room, which is perhaps music that he's trying to escape from the whole street scene from. I don't think that would be particularly appropriate down on Bodhi's corner. But yeah, and of course the way he plays his Xbox as well, there's this real escapism in his eyes when he's playing the Xbox, these sort of beat 'em up games by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
There's this sort of fear that he's trying to escape from, and I like the fact that we can see a big Super Soaker water pistol behind him on the shelf. Almost the idea that the summer is behind him, these fun piss balloon games, and another symbol of the innocence fading.
Yeah, sure enough, he ends up not touching that package at all. And
Yeah.
while still maintaining the facade, just, oh yeah, it was easy, hasn't actually done any of it. So just all these mixed messages and being pushed into something that he really shouldn't have to be doing. It doesn't really, I mean, whether or not he wants to be doing it is beside the point. I mean, there's no way that he should be being pushed into this by his own mother. So yeah, obviously he's not even touched the package.
Yeah, and having discussed all this stuff about Randy, I feel kind of like I want to retract what I said about Naaman. And in the first episode of this season, I think discussing his troubles has really helped me, to empathise with his character a lot more.
Yeah, no, I mean,
And
I've
think
always felt like people do kind of dismiss Naaman a little bit. I mean, there are really good reasons why he's not as, as easy to sympathise with, because his situation isn't as dire. I mean, he's somewhat advantaged compared to the other kids, and is again fortunate enough to be taken in by this program and to be taken on by Colvin, and he is very fortunate in that sense. So you don't really feel like there's as much tragedy involved in his story, but that doesn't take away from the genuine difficulty that he faces and how poisonous an environment he could have potentially been stuck in.
Yeah. No, definitely. So it's good to see those differences. And I think the final point I'll make about this bit here is pointing out more contrasts that the show is drawing. Obviously, Miss Anna is shown a lot in this episode, and she's shown to be spending a lot of her efforts on, reiterating to Randy that he needs to keep off the corners. If he's going to work to deliver flies, that's good, that's constructive, but he needs to stay off those corners, and she keeps reminding him. And obviously Naaman is being pushed onto the opposite. He's being pushed onto these corners during the election day rather than warned off them, and drawing more parallels between the parenting techniques.
Okay, let's move on to the next section now then, for our election day. On to what is arguably the big one. So at home that evening, Jen and Tommy watched the news reports that state there was a massive voter turnout and that Carcetti is in the lead. Similar scenes unfold at Royce and Gray's homes. Tommy learns that Bond is beating Demper in the state's attorney race. Jen convinces Tommy to go for a walk with her, and they make their way around the harbour. And Tommy tells Jen that he hopes to make Baltimore great again. Now eventually he gets a call from D'Agostino to tell him that Royce has conceded. The pair make their way to a celebration, and Tommy thanks his supporters and his opponents, appealing for their help in the forthcoming general election and in improving Baltimore for their children. Among the well-wishers, Council President Nerese Campbell congratulates Carcetti. Jen eventually tells them that she's going home, and Davis also attends the party and is unashamed of his actions, with Clay telling Carcetti that he let him off lightly. So yeah, that's our sort of the result, if you like. I do really like that we end up with them going for a walk. It's a nice place for him to discover that, I think, and how unsure he is about the victory as well. And he's like, I think so. He's not quite sure if he's even happy about whether he's won or not immediately, which is nice. Him being built up as the underdog, it's nice that he doesn't just suddenly explode into a bunch of confidence and, I knew I would win all along. It just wouldn't make any sense. It's great that there is this caution to his victory, which makes sense given how close it was and everything that he's learned and how he's realised how serious the situation is. It's not just automatically this great thing to celebrate that he's attained some power. He realises the gravity of the situation, and it makes him very endearing.
Yeah, it's certainly underplayed, isn't it? And there's that dolly zoom on his face as he contemplates what it really means to have won this, as you say. And the journey was great for him, and he seemed to thrive off it. But there is a contemplation here: is this what he really wanted? I enjoy a good challenge, but am I really going to be able to step up to this responsibility here? And there's real fear in his face when he actually finds out that this, what should be a victory, has come true. So yeah, really good way of dealing with that. And it's nice that he is taking that walk in the beautiful inner harbour, seeing the quite lovely cityscape, but also commenting on the ripe smell from the harbour, and these kind of things about the city that don't quite add up, I guess.
And then, of course, they have the victory party itself, if you like. It's nice that to note that Carcetti and Nerys Campbell start off very amiably here, but obviously we find out that their relationship is not so lovely once he actually settles into the role. So there's a very short, very friendly encounter between the two of them, but that doesn't really last once things really get going. Yeah,
definitely. And
anything else you want to say about the actual win itself? I mean, I think we covered it all there. It's all just nice to see Carcetti's reaction, largely, and it's just a nice little celebration scene. Really, it feels like a nice release from everything that we've witnessed, and it's been worth the journey. And we feel as relieved and as aware of what's going to come next as everyone else present in the scene itself.
Yeah, definitely, and very satisfying scene at the celebration. I like how the underplayed actual victory moment makes it clear that, again, there's still an element of facade to all of this, and that there's not necessarily a real cause for celebration. But it's great how Tommy really dominates that, and he gives a fantastic sort of opening speech. So many of these "I've just been elected" speeches go on forever, and they become very politically conscious. And Tommy just sort of says some important, team bonding things, and then just sort of pops off, and it comes off very genuine, and it seems to be a very, very good introduction to the administration. So I think it went very well for him. And I guess an interesting element is also Jen, who we see again here. She's straight off home once the speeches are over, despite the fact that this time Tommy does want her to stay. She still is an incredibly loyal wife, but she really does not see herself having any part in what Tommy does. And I guess that's an even more stronger confirmation of the fact that she's this support unit. She's playing a very important role, and Tommy's a lucky man to have her, but she really is not involving herself at all in the politics. So
that's right, yeah. And then Clay Davis turns up as well. Again, just with incredibly brazen attitudes, just like, yep, I did you, and I could have done you for more.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? And they just have to, they don't laugh. You almost think you have to laugh in this situation, but that they are genuinely pretty pissed off with him. But again, he's got too much power. There's not much they can do about him. He's just going to be a little shit stain on their shoe that they're going to have to deal with throughout the administration. And I guess we also see Nerys Campbell, as said, so she is going to be the first tricky candidate that Carcetti will have to deal with. She quite vocally disagrees with a lot of Carcetti's initial thoughts and directions for the administration. So right now things seem quite pleasant. Of course, it's the winning party, but she is going to become an initial tricky candidate for him.
That's right. Let's take a look at as the party dies down, and this will be our final little bit for the election day. So the party continues with Jerry, Wilson, Tommy, and D'Agostino in a downtown hotel. Jerry leaves with Wilson, and D'Agostino ends up coming on to Carcetti, telling him that he owes her a win bonus. He resists her seduction, despite his initial response, and Terry tries to convince him that he cannot go against nature, but eventually backs down when he resists a second time. She leaves and tells Tommy to send her a check instead. So,
Cold.
Carcetti goes right back to square one for a moment. I mentioned earlier how there are a few bits in this episode where we are reminded of early Carcetti. One of the things we're reminded of is his ability to just completely collapse and say that everything's failed and he's going to lose now. We've seen that quite a few times. He seems to have got a lot better, but he's threatened to fall down again with the smear. And another early Carcetti element is his womanizing, and he's shown a bit of a test. Basically, it's a test of his newfound position and whether or not he can control himself. And it seems that he really has learned something, as Terry says. He's maybe feeling a little bit mayoral. You could argue that he's smart enough not to do something like this because it threatens his position or his legitimacy as a now mayor-elect. But I do genuinely believe that he has learnt something and that he is trying to be that man of truth and who hates covetousness, as our preacher told us about at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. He... It's kind of the scene itself is almost a post-election sort of shit test, and we get the sense of the integrity of the man who we voted in. It's almost a chance to test whether we've made the right choice, and we see he's made the right call here. It bodes well for the administration. He has a wobble, but he recovers, and maybe you have learned something, is what Terry says, and it's almost a bit of a sting when she says, "Write me a check," but she's almost commenting for everyone when she says that that this guy does still have his integrity intact, even if it was tested at this point. So that was nice to see. I think it's a really good scene for Terry as well. Very, very consistent with her character from what we've known of her in season 3. Mm-hmm. And she's been very visible, but any sort of personality she had has been sidelined this season in favour of her being used solely as an election motivation tool. She's just become this kind of campaign character without any character behind it. And it's nice that her very last appearance on the show, which is here, she's sent off in a memorable way, consistent with her. And, I think she taught McNulty a lesson last season, and now she's teaching Carcetti one as well. And I don't think she meant to teach them the lessons like that, but she made both men think about themselves in both situations. And
yeah, that's true.
They became smarter men for it. So I think that's good to see, and it's a testament to the character that you can see it coming a mile off. I think since the initial Carcetti speech at the winning party, there's this sort of glimpse of Terry in her gown and all dolled up, and there's this sort of inevitability that we haven't forgotten about who you are, Terry, and the win bonus that you've requested back at the start of season 3 is probably going to play into this now. Nonetheless, a very interesting character, and a good reminder that she's a great character, but you probably still wouldn't recall her in your top 20 if you were asked to name them. You know what I mean? She's not one of the big players, but for the time she's on screen, she has a lot of aspects to her. She's quite three-dimensional. Just worth flying the flag for Terry, really.
Yeah,
I think
I agree.
She's done a great job on the show. Yeah, and she's off now. She hasn't missed an episode since she was introduced, early season 3, but she's now finished.
Yeah.
So she's back to DC to do another campaign, we assume. So
with that done, I think we should move on to our final strand for Omar, and take a little look at that. So again, I'm going to do this all in one go, just so that we can deal with it as one. So Officer Walker spots Omar in a convenience store. Omar realizes someone is waiting outside for him and hides his gun in a fridge. Walker stops Omar on his way out, and as he waits for backup, pockets the ring Omar is wearing. When Omar talks back, Walker brutally pushes him into the wall and knocks him over. When Omar claims that Walker is being unfair as there is no charge against him, Walker informs him that he's facing a murder charge. Clicchio and McNulty then arrive on the scene, and McNulty explains that he is being arrested on a robbery/murder warrant. Sant'Angelo then arrives with the wagon, and Omar asks McNulty for a phone call before he is taken in. McNulty gives him his own personal phone and dials Butchie for him. And later on, when Omar is brought into the prison, he's faced with aggression from almost all the other inmates. Omar prepares for the worst when 2 men are sent into his cell, as one of them carries a knife. But after a short standoff, one of them says that Butchie has sent them to protect him. So yeah, this is our little Omar bit in the episode, starting off with some of that Hawkeye vision that he's developed over time, seeing the police car in the mirror, knows that he's going to, as he says, he's going to grab himself a cold one, hides his gun in the fridge. It's nice that we get a little reference, perhaps a little reference to what was being said before. Remember in season 3 with Colvin talking about the paper bag for drugs. We see, obviously Omar has one of the paper bags for his cold one here instead. Which is kind of a nice little addition. And of course the ring. The ring has an arc. It reminds me of the Money Ain't Got No Owners. We have this fanciful item that is being shown off by its many wearers, and it can be adopted by anyone who cares to take it. So at first, this is obviously the ring that Marlo took from
Old Face
Andre, and then
Though we
Omar
always
takes
in the
that from
market
Marlo,
for a good soldier.
and now Officer
You
Walker
see
has
what we
taken it
like.
from Omar.
We take care of the
Yeah.
situation.
So it's
take
this
him in,
ring
school,
that has its
make him
little
family.
arc, and it's nice that they have this
And if you with us, you with
materialistic
us.
item, and
Just like
showing
we do
how,
with you all the way.
in the same way that money hasn't got any
Yeah,
owners,
mind you, yeah.
only spenders, these kind of
Look, man,
materialistic
I already got a
items
family.
can be taken
My
by anyone
mom's,
and technically owned
my little brother.
by anyone,
Yeah,
but
heard that.
they're just there as a
think
show
on it.
of, I don't know, just kind of bravado, the ability to
We'd be around.
flash
You
the
need something.
cash. It's just demonstrates what a bit of a, in a way, a strangely worthless item it is.
But as Old Face Andre said before, he was the original character to give it up. It has sentimental value for him.
yeah.
So
And it loses
it's
that, as it's passed from person to person.
Yeah, it almost seems to lose with each pass on. It seems to lose more and more of its sentiment. It just becomes this object, as you say, this worthless piece of bling. So I think it's really nice the way that spreads around. I kind of forget who it goes to next. I'm sure it moves around a little bit more.
I'm pretty sure we see Walker wearing it.
Yeah, because I know he breaks Donut's fingers. Not that he puts the ring on them, but again, that's kind of another link to everything. So, I think he does decide to wear this off.
And then it's kind of funny that Sant'Angelo mocks McNulty for being soft on Omar and calls him a Democrat. That's considered an insult, calling him a Democrat.
Yeah, which is odd because Baltimore is like one of the most democratic cities in the US, so it's perhaps Sant'Angelo's a bit out of sync with everyone else, but it's a little bit strange.
And then when Omar is brought into the prison itself, we have this mythology of Omar continuing here as well. This larger-than-life aspect follows in his image. Like, it seems like every single prisoner in the place has some grievance with Omar. It's a little bit ridiculous, but it seems to fit the character and how, out there some of the Omar scenes can be. It does seem a little bit like a superhero being locked up with all the bad guys he's ever tussled with. It's a little bit like that.
Oh yeah, he's setting the prison on fire, isn't he? Really quite an exciting scene as he's walked through it all. A bit of a sort of a ghost train for him. I know you've mentioned before that you find it a shame that this whole prison arc with Omar is resolved so quickly.
Yeah, it is over a bit too quickly. I mean, I do wish we'd seen a little bit more of it and heard some more tales. It had a little bit more of the Omar mythology reinforced, but it is a bit in and out.
Definitely. I mean, it leads to a couple of great scenes next episode where he calls on the favour back from Bird's trial, and also the scene where he stabs someone to get the attention of the guards. But overall it sort of resolves itself within one episode.
And
I
Butchie
guess
has
there
this
is
whole
some-
system worked out for Omar being in prison. He's got it all sorted out, and
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah,
resolved nice and easily.
years of these connections that he's got, all very impressive. And I like how they obviously put Omar's stuff at the end of the episode, and they contrast this solitary confinement in Omar's prison cell very much so with the liveliness of the Karkati celebration party. They put those two back to back for another sort of contrast.
Yeah, real contrast.
Yeah. And of course this is the arc that brings Donnie Andrews into prominence in the show, who is the real Omar, and Omar off of whom the character was based. He is the guy that jumped from whatever story it was and survived, as we'll see next season, and was a stick-up artist. He has been seen in Season 1 briefly at the baseball game, and I think he filled in Sidna, Herc and Carver in on the traditions of the game, but he's not been seen since then, and we can assume he's therefore not been in prison forever. He must have been sent in fairly recently, but he is one of Butchie's contacts within who's locked up at the moment. So, yeah, good to see. And very, very harshly deceitful, the way that he sort of toys with him with that knife.
Yeah.
Like, that's really, really quite brutal. And, yeah. But what relief for Omar when he's the rescue.
Yeah, we definitely feel a bit of relief there as well. And certainly, considering the first-time viewer, there's no inkling to that at all. It does feel like we're about to see, in a rare wire instance, we're about to see a fight. But no, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Nope, it's always some reason to avoid the action, I guess. Yeah. What did you think of the stuff with McNulty? I guess really not too much of it, really, but obviously he sort of alienates himself.
Yeah, I suppose there's a sense that, I don't know, we're still seeing a little bit of the McNulty wanting to do the right thing, but he's not. Again, maybe like with Carcetti, maybe he has learnt something. He has learnt not to jump down everyone's throat when he has this minor inkling that he could do the right thing or something. He seems a little bit more, seems sceptical, but not going too far. He's still obviously willing to go slightly extra the mile than the other guys and let him have his phone call. But it all seems quite measured for what we might normally expect from McNulty in other seasons.
Yeah, it feels like it's growing from what he said to Clicchio earlier. It's this desire to outsmart people, and he's not having a chance to do that where he is now. And I guess playing nice with the people he thinks deserve it is one way of doing that, and sort of fucking with the minds of the other Western patrol officers who would never dream of such courtesy to a convicted murderer as far as they're aware. So,
yeah, I mean, they pretty much insult Omar. They assume he's essentially wanted, and he's guilty. Yeah, there's not really any question about it.
Yeah, and I guess this is all the sort of stuff that would contribute to McNulty's. Not that he seems frustrated, but there must be some frustration that his ego is not getting suitably massaged by this job, and as we know, he will jump back into the investigation stuff. Yeah, but I just overall thought it was very good. I like how Omar, as almost as if spoken from Marlo's mouth, says, ain't no bail, Butchie. They saying it's murder. Make it no bail, says Marlo.
That's right.
The plan is coming to fruition perfectly, and yeah.
So that's the recap. What an episode!
All right.
So many things happening, so many important events, so many characters dealing with big changes, taking actions that have big implications. Just so much to deal with. So yeah, I think we pretty much covered it all there. Anything else you want to talk about before we take a look at our final couple of sections?
Sure. Yeah. I love how this episode shows how The Wire can sort of very naturally shift its main character to its liking. And obviously McNulty's off the radar, and no character seems to dominate. I like how this episode, it feels like Carcetti is really coming in to adopt that role now. Particularly the way we were the camera was behind him on that podium. It really felt like he'd suddenly taken the reins of this show, and it came across very naturally. And this was just such a hooking episode, everything to do with the election. I could have happily sort of had the rest of the show follow Carcetti's journey through the mayoral position solely. but there's so much more to squeeze in, and they do that whilst making sure they give a good amount of meat to Carcetti's continuing story. So it's times like this when you realise how spoiled you are with season 4. It's kind of like 3 or 4 great TV shows combined into one.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing that they've managed to fit it in, 13 episodes?
Yeah.
They've managed to cram an incredible amount of narrative, so many arcs, so many really in-depth characters. It's just been very neatly packaged in 13 amazing episodes, and you do feel a bit spoiled.
Yeah, and we're not even halfway through the season, and it feels like we've come on a pretty intense journey so far.
Yeah, like you say, it's this climax in the middle of the season. It is a bit of an odd thing for any TV show to do, but it does work. It does just bring us into the next chapter of the season really nicely. Now we know where this leads. Let's find out what happens with these characters in these new situations.
Definitely.
The effect
and
that the election
those...
is going to have on everyone else on the street.
Definitely. And all those arcs that we're going to follow. I mean, the other thing that's worth mentioning is how all of them, there's sort of no weak links in all the arcs. We care very intensely about all of them. I would perhaps argue that Bubbles is the one that I least care about, but it's still by no means boring. So
no Bubbles at all in this episode.
No, certainly. I mean, he pops up now and then, season 4, and keeps on getting beaten up by that guy. Obviously, the final stuff with Sherrod is pretty tragic, but for the most part, he's generally floating around. But yeah, just worth mentioning, really, as it is. I think my favourite episode. Sort of give it a little bit of a big up at the end, and if possible, I think this is one of the few times where it might be worth reinstating scenes and characters. Just as there are some proper standout ones here.
All right, you're welcome to do it. I don't have anything to offer.
Sure.
We might just win this thing.
What do you think kept me up all night?
With all due respect to your early morning analysis, we got 3 back-to-back drive-time radio interviews I wore out my knee pads to get. The people running your campaign are professionals, Tommy. Don't try this shit at home.
You know, I might just be a job for you in the Herc administration. Press secretary, chief of staff.
Oh, get in the fucking car.
Okay, well, I'll quickly get through these. So I think the best scenes really are probably the opening, the closing, and the middle. So the churches, the election montage with Cutty, and then the final stuff with the election win. All of that stuff is just absolutely fantastic, and I did quite enjoy the Marlo Herc stunt and the sort of train station prank. And then, of course, the characters, very much an easy 3 here. Carcetti, Norman, and Terry, I think. All 3 of them were developed in ways that we had not yet seen. Particularly, big up to Terry, who is now leaving the show. And they found a very good way to end her character that drew on everything that we learned about her in season 3. And obviously Norman is becoming an even more important character, and they suggest him stepping up into the leadership position in the new administration. And then, yeah, Carcetti, just well done, Carcetti. A good moment for him. So those would be my picks anyway.
All right, so do you want to take a look at the title first off?
Yeah.
Our margin of error. Obviously, the results of the poll itself, we have all these voting intentions that he talks about at the very beginning of the episode with the preacher. He's talking about all these statistical analyses. We have the margin of error, a random variation, or something like that in the results. So that's kind of our literal meaning that is used in the episode. But then I suppose we also have the margins of error in between all of our characters and the decisions that they're making. I mean, it's quite a general use, really. What do you think that it might have applied to in this episode specifically, rather than obviously our literal interpretation?
Yeah, I really quite like this title. I think it's one of the best. It has, I think, a few meanings. It certainly makes you think. I don't think there's anything that it really directly relates to, unlike a lot of the titles. But I like how you can read into it to have some sort of wider meaning. And I think particularly, obviously, literally in the show, it's used as a tool of modesty from Carcetti. When the preacher kind of celebrates his success, he tries to downplay it by suggesting he's within the margin of error. So that's kind of one way that it's kind of used in a different way than you'd expect. And also might be worth saying that Carcetti perhaps made a marginal error. Well, he did make a marginal error at the end of the episode, from which he recovered. That's kind of stretching it a little bit, and also the notion of juking the stats, the idea of these sort of error bars that would be a little bit stretched through various stats juking, and obviously that ties in with what's going on in the politics and the homicide department and what Rules is doing, and also just in general the smears, the idea of juking things.
The smears that we have both in the politics and in the school made me think of a particular margin of error and having these random acts or particular decisions being made causing this knock-on effect. If imagine if Paul and Monel had just ignored her, would she have still gone ahead and reported what she thought happened to the senior staff at the school? It's kind of these random elements can change the whole situation, and that swung it for Randy more than anyone else.
Definitely, yeah. Are the law of averages in your favour? I guess it tries to look at that statistical element of it. And I guess in terms of, again, looking at it as a description or a definition, the margin of error is the difference between the expected reality and the actual reality, as it's sort of on paper. And obviously that's, again, bringing up the idea of a facade, particularly in terms of the politics, possibly in terms of Namond as well. Again, just a few things that you can...
It's like a measurement of confidence, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah. So it's a lot of things that you can not sort of definitely draw from margin of error, but a lot of things that you can begin to dissect from it, so I really like the title for that reason.
And then we have our epigraph. Again, politically related, we have Norman saying, "Don't try this shit at home." Obviously having a go at Carcetti for trying to second-guess all the strategy that they've made, and that he does need to rely on these professionals that he's hired to take on these specific jobs. He cannot be everywhere at once. He cannot understand everything about the election. It does need to, in the way that he was saying that he couldn't... in the way that he said that he was resigned before, and now he couldn't be. In a way... Norman is telling him that he does at the very least need to resign himself to not being able to handle it all himself, not being able to make all of these perfect decisions, having to deal with take the rough with the smooth, having these things like the smear. He has to just handle it. It's just part of the game, and he's learning that as he goes along. He cannot have this idealistic situation that he's always been talking about. No such thing exists. He has to deal with it piece by piece. We also, I think, there's obviously a reference as well to Herc trying to put himself in, that ideal position that he considers himself in. He considers himself a master enough to take on advanced surveillance techniques, and because he's a fool, he ends up, completely messing it up and trying to get Marlo where he lives, essentially, in his place of meeting, and he ends up being taken the mickey out of very publicly.
Yeah, very good points. I had not considered those actually myself. I think, as you mentioned before, the idea that it tries to instill the values into Carcetti that you need help, you can't just run this place under your own steam. And that's obviously a nice response to Reverend Reed's sermon about the need to find a group of people that you trust to help you lead. So I think that feeds in quite well. I think it's perhaps the only time the epigraph has chosen a comedic statement over an insightful one. Not that this isn't insightful, but it's more of a kind of it's kind of a comic relief moment more than anything. And I think that makes it good. And Norman is a very funny character. Of course, we didn't even mention the whole My Carcetti and Me song that he begins to rattle out. But yeah, so not too much I can draw from the epigraph, but I do like the fact that Norman's getting a little bit of recognition.
Do you not think maybe Namond as well? He's the whole drug game is really coming home from him. Is his own mother at home telling him that he needs to do it, and he's bringing these drugs home, and he's not even touching the package. He's trying to save face and say that he's done this, that, and the other when he hasn't. He should not be doing this by himself. He should not be have all this responsibility placed on him.
That's true, and then of course that's why he tries to very quite forcefully seek Michael's help with it. Yeah. So, very, very good.
Yeah, amazing episode. An incredible hour of television, there's no doubt about it. Just so much manages to take place, so many things paying off, and but not coming to an end. This is right in the middle of the season, as we've established. So this just leads us on to the second half, where Carcetti must now deal with the fact that he has won, and that he now actually must take on the responsibilities of the mayor. So very much looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, Unto Others.
That's right.
Episode
7. So I guess we will return as normal next week, unless I'm not aware of any more likely breaks.
No, I don't think so. I'm thinking I don't know if we are going to do a mid-season break.
I'm quite happy to continue.
Yeah, so am I, certainly. So we'll keep you posted if anything changes, but I think it should be fine. We should be here next week. So
yeah, in the meantime, feel free to drop us any thoughts that you have on this episode. If this is another one of your favourites and you've got some things to say about it that maybe we haven't covered, then feel free to send us an email at caughtonthewire@gmail.com, or check out the website. Obviously, you can download all of the podcasts, all of the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. You also learn more about the show. There's a contact form if you want to use that as well. So, yeah, check it out. Thanks very much for joining us once more, and we shall see you next week for Season 4, Episode 7.